In the year 586 before Christ, one of the most devastating sieges the ancient world had ever witnessed was on the verge of transforming human history in ways no one could foresee. It started with a vision, a dream that troubled a pagan ruler's mind, one he simply could not decipher. This marks the turning point when the God of Israel would employ the greatest empire the earth had known to bring his age-old prophecies to life, triggering a chain of events that would resonate throughout all time. Tonight, as you ease into slumber, you'll travel through the full biblical account of Babylon. Starting from Nimrod's defiant tower, moving through Nebuchadnezzar's statue of gold, encountering Daniel among the lions, and discovering the enigmatic words inscribed on Belshazzar's palace wall. Every battle, every prediction, every divine act that molded this storied empire is waiting for you within the sacred texts. Before we begin, though, think about tapping that like button and hitting subscribe if you haven't done so yet. When you support us, it means we can keep creating content to help you relax or discover something fascinating. And please, share with us where you're tuning in from and what hour it is where you are. We're creating a worldwide family here, giving you the chance to meet and bond with others who share your interests from every corner of the globe. So then, with no more delay, shall we dive into today's narrative. In the beginning, a river existed. Long before settlements emerged from the earth, before monarchs adorned themselves with golden crowns, there was flowing water. Two great rivers cut through an unending wasteland, bringing forth something extraordinary. The Tigris and the Euphrates moved like twin snakes across desolate terrain, cradling life within their murky currents. Imagine this primeval landscape. No pathways, no fortifications, no shrines stretching skyward, only water drifting gradually through sand and rock. With each passing season, across countless centuries, these rivers delivered far more than simple moisture. They transported visions of possibility. Wherever these waters made contact with the ground, something awakened. Vegetation broke through soil that had never experienced growth before. Creatures arrived to drink from the waters, then lingered. Little by little, people tracked the animals, pursuing the hope of verdant growth where only barren brown had existed previously. The territory situated between these rivers bore a name destined to echo across the ages: Mesopotamia. In the ancient language, it simply means the land between the rivers. Uncomplicated words for a location that would give birth to civilization as we know it. Right here, in this nursery of flowing streams, humanity would take its initial strides toward urban centers, written codes, and narratives preserved in stone. The flooding arrived each springtime like a dependable clock. Waters would swell, overflow their boundaries, and blanket the level plains. When they withdrew, they deposited abundant, dark earth behind, a present from the far-off mountains where the rivers started their course. This sediment contained something almost magical. Seeds sown here would grow robust and tall. The earliest inhabitants learned to interpret the waters. They observed the heavens, sensed the wind's direction, and anticipated when the floods would arrive. They constructed their initial dwellings on elevated terrain, waiting for the waters to bestow their annual gift. Then they would step into the soft mud, scattering seeds that would eventually yield their crops. The rivers became their teachers in patience. Water advances slowly, yet it never ceases. It discovers routes around barriers, carves fresh pathways when familiar ones become blocked. The inhabitants learned to reason like water, persistent, flexible, constantly flowing toward their objectives. One generation after another, families came back to the identical locations along the riverbanks. They started noticing rhythms in the terrain, in the changing seasons, in how water conducted itself. This understanding became their initial wealth, transmitted through tales shared beside firelight, through melodies hummed during planting time. Time advanced like the rivers, steady and unhurried, perpetually moving forward. The population expanded in both size and understanding. They discovered how to collaborate, to distribute the abundance from the floods, to construct their existence around the pattern of ascending and descending waters. Young ones played in the shallow areas, while their elders tended the rich farmland. They splashed about and laughed, unaware they were living at the dawn of something remarkable. Their games in the mud served as training for the magnificent structures their future descendants would erect. Sacred buildings and royal residences, hanging gardens and towers that would seem to graze the clouds. The surrounding desert observed and waited. Past the green ribbons alongside the rivers, immense emptiness extended to every visible edge. Yet the inhabitants had discovered their paradise within this slender band of existence. They possessed water, fertile soil, and open sky. What more was necessary? When nighttime arrived, after the day's labor concluded and families assembled around modest fires, the elder members would share stories. They spoke of the rivers as divine entities, of the floods as heavenly presence, of their small portion of green earth as hallowed ground. These narratives would evolve and transform, but their essence would stay consistent: thankfulness for water in a parched land. The stars overhead mirrored in the slow-flowing rivers, forming a second heaven below. The inhabitants learned to interpret these nighttime arrangements as well, measuring time by the shifts of luminous points in the darkness. The celestial realm and the waters became their earliest books, instructing them about patterns, about structure, about the magnificence of phenomena that repeat endlessly. In this tranquil place situated between flowing waters, beneath the limitless sky, the initial seeds of something magnificent were planted. Not merely the seeds of grain that would nourish bodies, but the seeds of concepts that would nourish spirits. The rivers had provided them with life. Before long, they would give life to urban centers, to legal systems, to narratives that would outlast the very stones they would eventually learn to carve. The water continued its flow, bearing their aspirations toward the ocean, toward the coming day, toward a future radiant with potential. From Sumer to Akkad, the rivers maintained their commitment. Where water met earth, life flourished. Modest settlements expanded into villages, villages into towns. Inhabitants learned to mold clay into vessels, to weave reeds into containers, to craft tools that assisted them in taming the untamed landscape. In the southern region, where the rivers decelerated and dispersed through wetlands, an exceptional people arose. They identified themselves as the Sumerians, and they would instruct the world in the art of living together within cities. Their narrative begins with mud. The identical rich clay that nourished their harvests became the cornerstone of their society. The Sumerians surveyed the level landscape and perceived opportunity. They excavated channels to direct water wherever they wished it to travel. They constructed raised platforms to elevate their dwellings above the flooding. Most significantly, they discovered how to collaborate on projects far too enormous for any single family to finish independently. Their earlier cities emerged like islands from the marshland. Uruk, Lagash, names that murmur of ancient magnificence even today. Each city represented a miracle of cooperation. Thousands of individuals choosing to reside and labor together for collective benefit. They erected walls for defense, temples for their deities, and marketplaces where cultivators and artisans could exchange their products. At each city's center stood a ziggurat, an enormous stepped tower that ascended toward the heavens. These weren't merely buildings, they were prayers constructed from brick and mortar. The Sumerians held the belief that their gods resided in the sky, and the ziggurats were stairways for divine visits to earth. The most astonishing innovation emerged from their requirement to maintain records. When cities expanded, people needed to monitor who possessed what, who was indebted to whom, and how much grain was preserved for difficult times. The Sumerians impressed wedge-shaped marks into soft clay tablets, developing the world's initial writing system. They named it cuneiform, and it would safeguard their thoughts for thousands of years. These clay tablets share wonderful narratives, Some document business transactions and tax collections, the practical matters of everyday existence. Others preserve heroic tales of champions and gods, of great floods and conflicts, of romance and sorrow. The Sumerians were the first people to inscribe their visions and render them permanent. Their cities hummed with movement. Potters rotated clay into lovely containers. Weavers fashioned textiles that would be exchanged across continents. Metal craftsmen learned to merge copper and tin to produce bronze, stronger than either metal alone. The Sumerians were innovators, artists, and visionaries all at once. They also provided the world with its earliest schools. Young scribes would sit for extended periods, practicing their cuneiform characters on clay tablets. They studied mathematics, literature, and the correct methods of conducting commerce. Education served as the pathway to advancement in Sumerian culture, and knowledge was valued above gold. However, the Sumerians were not isolated in Mesopotamia. To the north, Semitic populations had settled along the rivers, learning from their southern counterparts while cultivating their own customs. The most prosperous of these northern groups were the Akkadians, guided by a king whose name still resonates with authority, Sargon. Sargon of Akkad was born in modest circumstances, yet he envisioned greatness. Legend claims he was discovered as an infant floating in a basket upon the river, rescued and nurtured by a gardener. Whether this account holds truth or not, it captures something essential about Sargon. He was an individual who rose from nothing to reshape the world. Around 2334 before the Common Era, Sargon conquered the Sumerian cities one after another, establishing history's first genuine empire. He unified the north and south under Akkadian governance, spreading his language and traditions throughout Mesopotamia. For the first time, the land between the rivers was governed by a single monarch. The Akkadian Empire introduced fresh vitality to the ancient world. Sargon's armies marched past Mesopotamia's borders, transporting their culture to remote territories. Trade pathways extended from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Concepts circulated as freely as merchandise, generating a rich blend of traditions and innovations. Sargon's capital city, Akkad, became legendary in its own right. Though archaeologists have never located its precise position, ancient writings describe it as a city of marvels, with palaces and temples that matched anything the world had witnessed. It was a cultural crossroads where Sumerian wisdom encountered Akkadian drive. The empire endured for more than 150 years, with Sargon's descendants governing from their splendid capital. They constructed roadways, standardized measurements and weights, and established the first postal network. The Akkadians demonstrated that diverse populations could coexist under fair laws, sharing wealth and shielding each other from outside dangers. Yet all empires encountered obstacles. Climate shifts brought drought to the northern regions. Uprisings erupted in distant territories. New populations pressed against the frontiers, seeking their own portion of the prosperous land. The Akkadian Empire eventually fragmented, but its influence endured. The Sumerians and Akkadians had demonstrated to the world what became possible when people collaborated. They had accepted the river's gift and multiplied it 1,000 times over, establishing cities, laws, artistic works, and literature that would inspire civilizations for thousands of years to come. In the stillness of evening, when the day's labor was finished, inhabitants in these ancient cities would assemble to hear accounts of their ancestors. They spoke of the time before cities, when their forefathers lived uncomplicated lives beside the riverside. Those days appeared impossibly remote now, like memories from a dream. The rivers continued flowing, bearing their ancient commitments, but now they flowed past walls and towers, through channels carved by human hands, serving cities that had expanded far beyond anything the initial settlers could have conceived. The seeds planted by flowing water had matured into a forest of human accomplishment, Hammurabi's golden dawn. Time flowed like the rivers themselves, transporting new populations and new aspirations into Mesopotamia. The Akkadian Empire had collapsed, and for generations the territory experienced conflict. City battled city, kingdom ascended and descended, and the inhabitants yearned for peace. Then, in the city of Babylon, a young prince named Hammurabi rose to the throne. Babylon was not yet the marvel of the world it would eventually become. When Hammurabi inherited the crown around 1792 before the Common Era, his kingdom was modest, encircled by more formidable neighbors. Other monarchs dismissed him as merely another insignificant king in a land abundant with petty kingdoms. They would discover how mistaken they were. Hammurabi possessed something uncommon among rulers: patience. While other kings hurried into combat, he waited, observed, and strategized. He grasped that genuine power originated not from military strength alone, but from the devotion of people who trusted their king, cared for their well-being. The young monarch spent his early years strengthening Babylon from within. He reconstructed temples, enhanced the city's defenses, and most significantly, listened to his people's worries. Merchants voiced complaints about unjust trade practices. Farmers expressed concerns about water rights. Families sought justice when they suffered wrongs. Hammurabi heard them all and started to envision a superior approach. His chance arrived when the power balance shifted across Mesopotamia. The kingdom of Larsa controlled the south, while Eshnunna maintained influence in the north. These two powers were engaged in a conflict that drained both. Hammurabi observed and waited for the ideal moment to take action. When that moment came, Hammurabi struck with unexpected swiftness and expertise. His armies were well-trained and disciplined, but more significantly, they fought for a king who had earned their admiration. City after city opened its gates to Babylonian forces, not from fear, but from hope for the justice Hammurabi had promised. The conquest of Larsa in 1763, before the Common Era, signaled the true beginning of Babylon's golden age. Hammurabi had unified most of Mesopotamia under his governance, establishing an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean trade routes. But conquest represented only the start of his vision. What made Hammurabi genuinely exceptional was not his military achievements, but what he accomplished with victory. Rather than governing through fear, he chose to rule through law. He understood that an empire constructed on justice would endure longer than one built on the sword alone. The king established his capital in Babylon, transforming it from a modest city into a magnificent metropolis. New temples rose to honor the gods, their walls gleaming with glazed brick and precious metals. The famous Ishtar Gate, though constructed by later kings, had its origins in Hammurabi's vision of Babylon as a city deserving of divine favor. Trade flourished under Hammurabi's governance. Merchants from distant lands came to Babylon's markets, bringing exotic products and fresh concepts. The city became a cultural crossroads where Sumerian traditions blended with Akkadian innovations, generating something vibrant and new. But Hammurabi's greatest accomplishment was not constructed of brick and mortar. It was carved in stone and written in the hearts of his people. The king invested years crafting a comprehensive legal code that would guarantee justice for all his subjects, from the highest noble to the most humble servant. The code addressed everything from trade disputes to family matters, from property rights to criminal justice. It established clear punishments for wrongdoing and protections for the innocent. Most remarkably, it recognized that different circumstances require different responses, a revolutionary concept for its time. Hammurabi personally oversaw the creation of his legal masterwork. He consulted with judges, priests, merchants, and farmers, ensuring that his laws reflected the genuine needs of his people. The code was not imposed from above, but grew from the ground up, rooted in the daily experiences of those who would live under its guidance. When the laws were complete, Hammurabi ordered them carved on massive stone pillars called stelae. These monuments were placed in temples and public squares throughout the empire, ensuring that everyone could know their rights and responsibilities. The law would no longer be a mystery known only to the powerful. The king's own words, preserved in the prologue to his code, reveal his vision. When the lofty Anu, king of the Anunnaki, and Enlil, lord of heaven and earth, who determines the destinies of the land, determined for Marduk, the firstborn of Ea. The Enlil functions over all mankind, made him great among the Igigi, called Babylon by its exalted name, made it supreme in the world, established for him in its midst an enduring kingship, whose foundations are as firm as heaven and earth. At that time, Anu and Enlil named me Hammurabi, the exalted prince, the reverent one, to cause justice to prevail in the land. The people of Babylon responded to their king's wisdom with unprecedented loyalty and prosperity. Crime decreased as potential wrongdoers knew they would face swift and certain justice. Trade increased as merchants could rely on consistent laws across the empire. Families felt secure, knowing their rights were protected by written law. Hammurabi ruled for 43 years, and his reign became the standard by which later kings would be measured. He had taken a small kingdom and transformed it into the greatest power in the known world. More importantly, he had shown that true greatness came not from conquest alone, but from the wisdom to govern well. As the king aged, he could look out from his palace windows at the city he had built and the empire he had created. The rivers still flowed past Babylon's walls, carrying trade goods and diplomatic messages to distant lands. The god Marduk's temple rose majestically above the city, its golden peak catching the first rays of dawn. In the quiet moments before sleep, Hammurabi might have reflected on the journey that had brought him from a minor prince to the ruler of an empire. He had succeeded not through cruelty or luck, but through patient wisdom and genuine care for his people's welfare. His laws would outlive him, his city would grow even greater, and his name would be remembered as long as humans valued justice. The golden dawn of Babylon had begun, and its light would shine across the ancient world for generations to come. The code in the courtyard, in the heart of Babylon, where merchants haggled and children played, stood a massive pillar of black stone, taller than 3 men, covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks. It drew curious crowds every day. This was no ordinary monument. It was Hammurabi's code, the world's first comprehensive written law, displayed for all to see and understand. The pillar itself was a work of art. At its top, carved in relief, the god Shamash sat on his throne, flames dancing from his shoulders as he handed the symbols of justice to King Hammurabi. Below this divine scene, 282 laws were etched in cuneiform script, each one carefully crafted to address the real problems people faced in their daily lives. The laws covered everything imaginable. A farmer whose crops were damaged by a neighbor's wandering ox could find remedy here. A merchant cheated in a business deal could seek justice. A woman wronged by her husband could discover her rights. The code spoke to rich and poor alike, though it acknowledged the social realities of ancient times. One of the most famous principles carved in stone was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This phrase, which would echo through history, represented something revolutionary for its time, the idea that punishment should fit the crime. Before Hammurabi, justice often meant revenge, with penalties far exceeding the original wrong. The code brought proportion and reason to the dispensing of justice, but the laws were more nuanced than this simple phrase suggests. The code recognized different classes of people and tailored punishments accordingly. A blow struck against a nobleman carried a heavier penalty than the same act against a commoner. While this seems unfair by modern standards, it represented a major advance in legal thinking, the idea that circumstances matter in determining justice. The economic laws reveal a sophisticated understanding of commerce. The code regulated interest rates, preventing moneylenders from charging excessive fees that would trap borrowers in debt. It established standard weights and measures, ensuring fair trade across the empire. It protected widows and orphans from exploitation, recognizing that society's most vulnerable members needed special safeguards. Family law occupied a large portion of the code, reflecting the central importance of household relationships in Babylonian society. Marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption were all carefully regulated. The laws protected women's property rights in ways that were progressive for the ancient world, while also maintaining traditional family structures. Perhaps most remarkably, the code included laws protecting slaves from excessive cruelty. While it accepted slavery as a fact of life, it established limits on how slaves could be treated and provided paths for them to regain their freedom. This recognition of basic human dignity, even for the lowest members of society, set Babylon apart from many of its neighbors. The process of creating these laws was as important as their content. Hammurabi didn't simply dictate them from his throne. Instead, he consulted with judges, priests, and community leaders throughout his empire. He studied the legal traditions of the peoples he had conquered, incorporating the best elements of each into his comprehensive code. Local courts throughout the empire used the code as their guide. Judges were required to know the laws and apply them consistently, regardless of their personal opinions or local customs. This standardization of justice was revolutionary. For the first time in history, a person could know what to expect from the legal system, no matter where they lived within the empire. The physical placement of the code's stone copies was carefully planned. They stood in temple courtyards where people gathered for festivals, in market squares where merchants conducted business, and near city gates where travelers could learn the laws of the land they were entering. The law was made truly public, accessible to anyone who could read, or who could find someone to read it for them. Scribes created clay tablet copies of the most important laws, making them even more widely available. These tablets were kept in schools, government offices, and private homes. Legal education became part of general education, with young people learning not just how to read and write, but what their rights and responsibilities were as citizens. The code also served a religious purpose. Ancient peoples believed that good laws came from the gods, and Hammurabi presented his code as divinely inspired. The image of Shamash handing the symbols of justice to the king reinforced this idea. Following the law was not just a civil duty, it was a religious obligation. The practical effects of the code were immediate and profound. Crime rates dropped as potential wrongdoers realized they would face certain punishment. Trade flourished as merchants could rely on consistent legal protections. Families felt more secure, knowing their rights were clearly defined and protected. The code's influence extended far beyond Hammurabi's lifetime and empire. Future rulers would model their own legal systems on his pioneering work. The Hebrew Bible's legal codes show clear influence from Hammurabi's principles. Roman law, which would later govern much of the world, built upon foundations first laid in ancient Babylon. Visitors to Babylon marveled at the sight of laws carved in stone for all to see. In their own lands, law was often the whim of local rulers or the memory of tribal elders. Here, in this great city between the rivers, justice had been given permanent form, elevated from human caprice to divine command. As evening fell over the city, the stone pillars cast long shadows across the courtyards where they stood. In those shadows, the ordinary people of Babylon went about their lives with a security unknown to previous generations. They lived under the protection of written law, in a society where justice was not just an ideal, but a daily reality. The code represented more than legal innovation. It was a promise that the strong would not prey upon the weak, that agreements would be honored, that wrongs would be made right. In a world often governed by might alone, Hammurabi had created something precious, a kingdom where right made might, where the law was king. Temples and ziggurats. Above the bustling streets of ancient Babylon, massive structures reached toward the heavens like stone prayers. These were the ziggurats, stepped pyramids that served as bridges between earth and sky, between human worshippers and their gods. Each brick was placed with reverence. each level built with the hope of divine blessing. The most magnificent of these sacred towers was the Etemenanki, dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's patron god. Its name meant house of the foundation of heaven and earth, and it rose in 7 terraces to a height that amazed all who saw it. Later peoples would remember it as the Tower of Babel, though by then its glory had faded to legend. Building a ziggurat was a community effort that could span generations. Thousands of workers labored to create the millions of bricks needed for construction. Each brick was made from the same river mud that had nourished the first settlements, mixed with straw and baked in the sun. The builders saw their work as holy, transforming the basic elements of their land into something sacred. The foundation was laid with special care, often including small tablets inscribed with prayers and offerings. These foundation deposits were meant to ensure the god's favor and the building's stability. Workers would chant as they laid each course of bricks, their voices rising with the walls they built. The ziggurat step design served both practical and spiritual purposes. Each level was smaller than the one below, creating a stable structure that could support enormous weight. The terraces also represented the layers of heaven, with each level bringing worshippers closer to the realm of the gods. Access to the upper levels was carefully controlled. External staircases built into the structure's sides led from terrace to terrace. Only priests and other religious officials could climb these sacred steps, carrying offerings and prayers to the temple at the summit. The common people could only gaze upward and imagine the divine presence dwelling above. The temple at the ziggurat's peak was the most sacred space in the city. Here the god was believed to dwell in physical form, represented by a golden statue that was tended like a living being. Priests would wake the god each morning with hymns, offer meals throughout the day, and provide evening entertainment. The god was not just worshipped, but hosted, treated as an honored guest in their earthly home. These temples were centers of learning as well as worship. Attached to each major temple was a school where young scribes learned to read and write. The curriculum included not just religious texts, but also mathematics, astronomy, and literature. The priests were the keepers of knowledge, preserving the wisdom of ages in their libraries of clay tablets. The temple complex included more than just the ziggurat itself. Surrounding the great tower were smaller buildings that housed the priests, workshops for crafting religious objects, and storerooms for the offerings brought by worshippers. These complexes were like small cities within the larger city, with their own economies and social structures. The economic power of the temples was enormous. They owned vast estates, worked by tenant farmers, received regular offerings from devoted worshippers, and engaged in trade and money lending. This wealth was used not just to maintain the temples, but to support the poor, fund public works, and sponsor festivals that brought joy to the entire community. The most important of these festivals was the New Year celebration, which lasted for 11 days and culminated in a grand procession to the Temple of Marduk. The king himself participated in this ritual, symbolically receiving his authority from the god for another year. The entire city would be decorated with flowers and banners, while priests chanted the creation epic that told how Marduk had brought order to the world. Different gods had different temples throughout the city, each designed to reflect the deity's particular nature and powers. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, had a temple decorated with images of lions and flowers. Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom, was honored in a temple lined with inscribed tablets. The diversity of these sacred spaces reflected the rich spiritual life of the Babylonian people. The construction techniques used in these temples were marvels of ancient engineering. The builders had learned to create strong mortar from bitumen, a natural tar that seeped from the ground in some areas. This waterproof binding helped the structures survive the seasonal floods and the test of time. Decorative elements transformed these functional buildings into works of art. Glazed bricks in brilliant blues and greens covered the walls, creating patterns that caught and reflected light. Golden fixtures gleamed in the torchlit interiors, Carved reliefs told stories of gods and heroes, turning the temple walls into illustrated books of mythology. The ziggurats also served as administrative centers for the communities they served. Records were kept here of births, deaths, marriages, and land transactions. Legal disputes were often resolved in temple courts, with priests serving as judges. The temple was truly the heart of the community, pumping life-giving services throughout the social body. At night, when the city grew quiet, the ziggurats remained active. Priests would climb to the highest terraces to observe the stars, carefully recording the movements of planets and constellations. This astronomical knowledge was used to create calendars, predict eclipses, and provide guidance for agricultural and religious activities. The sight of these massive structures dominated the landscape for miles around. Travelers approaching Babylon would see the ziggurats long before they reached the city walls, their peaks catching the first rays of dawn and the last light of sunset. These towers announced to the world that here was a city blessed by the gods, a place where heaven touched earth. The builders of these sacred structures believed they were creating more than buildings. They were constructing pathways to the divine. Each brick laid was an act of devotion. Each room completed was a gift to the gods. The ziggurats stood as proof of human aspiration, monuments to the desire to reach beyond the mundane world and touch something eternal. In the shadow of these great towers, the people of Babylon lived their daily lives with the constant reminder that they were part of something larger than themselves. The ziggurats connected them to their gods, to their history, and to their hopes for the future. These sacred mountains of brick and bitumen were the physical embodiment of faith itself. Gods of the riverlands. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the rivers whispered their ancient songs, the gods of Babylon stirred in their heavenly realm. These divine beings shaped the world with their thoughts, their emotions, and their mighty deeds. To understand Babylon, one must first know the gods who watched over it from their throne rooms in the sky. At the head of this celestial court sat Marduk, the young god who had won supremacy through courage and wisdom. His story was told every new year in the sacred precincts of his great temple, a tale of cosmic battle and triumphant order. But Marduk's rise to power was not inevitable. It was earned through the most dramatic struggle in all mythology. Long before humans walked the earth, the universe was ruled by chaos. The primordial waters, personified as the dragon Tiamat, held dominion over all that existed. These were not peaceful waters like the life-giving rivers, but turbulent seas of confusion and strife. Tiamat and her consort Apsu represented the wild forces that existed before order, before law, before the gentle rhythms that govern civilized life. The younger gods, born from these primordial waters, grew restless under the chaotic rule of their elders. They desired order, structure, and purpose. Their noise and energy disturbed Apsu's sleep, and in his anger, he decided to destroy his own children. But the wise god Ea discovered the plot and killed Apsu first, claiming his power and establishing his own dwelling place in the sweet waters below. Tiamat's rage at her consort's death knew no bounds. She gathered an army of monsters, dragons, serpents, and creatures of nightmare to wage war against the younger gods. At their head, she placed Kingu, her new champion, granting him the tablets of destiny that gave him power over fate itself. The young gods trembled before Tiamat's terrible host. One by one, the greatest among them tried to face the dragon goddess and failed. Even Ea, who had defeated Apsu, could not stand against her fury. It seemed that chaos would triumph, and the universe would return to its original state of formless confusion. Then Marduk stepped forward. Young and strong, armed with bow and net, he offered to face Tiamat on one condition. If he won, he would become king of all the gods. The desperate deities agreed, and the cosmic battle began. The fight between Marduk and Tiamat shook the foundations of existence. She opened her jaws to swallow him, but he caught her with his net and drove the winds into her throat. When she gasped for breath, he shot an arrow into her heart, slaying the great dragon of chaos. From her corpse, he created the world. Her body became the earth, her blood the rivers, her bones the mountains. But Marduk's work was not finished. From the blood of Kingu, Tiamat's defeated champion, he created humanity. These new beings would serve the gods, offering worship and sacrifice so that the divine beings could rest from their labors. Humans were thus born with a sacred purpose, to maintain the order that Marduk had established through his victory over chaos. This creation story was more than entertainment for the Babylonians. It explained their place in the universe and their relationship with the divine. Every spring flood reminded them of the primordial waters. Every harvest showed them the fruits of divine order. Their king ruled by Marduk's authority. Their laws reflected his justice. Their city was his earthly dwelling place. But Marduk was not alone in the Babylonian pantheon. His father, Ea, remained the god of wisdom and fresh water, dwelling in the Apsu below the earth. From his realm came the life-giving springs and the knowledge that allowed humans to thrive. Craftsmen and scribes especially honored Ea, seeing their skills as gifts from this wise deity. Enlil, the god of air and storms, controlled the winds that brought both blessing and destruction. His breath could fill the sails of merchant ships or unleash hurricanes that leveled cities. Farmers watched the sky carefully, reading the signs of Enlil's mood in the movement of clouds and the direction of breezes. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, embodied the passionate forces that drove human life. As the evening star, she inspired lovers to embrace. As the morning star, she led warriors into battle. Her dual nature reflected the Babylonian understanding that creation and destruction were closely linked, that life required both love and conflict to flourish. The sun god Shamash brought light and justice to the world each day. His daily journey across the sky allowed him to see all human actions, making him the perfect judge of right and wrong. It was Shamash who had given Hammurabi the authority to create his famous code of laws, blessing the king's work with divine approval. Sin, the moon god, marked the passage of time with his changing phases. His silvery light guided travelers through dark nights and helped farmers know when to plant and harvest. The crescent moon became a symbol of divine protection, worn as an amulet by those who sought the god's favor. These major deities were supported by countless minor gods, each with their own sphere of influence. There were gods of individual cities, gods of particular crafts, gods who watched over households and families. The Babylonian world was thoroughly populated with divine beings, each playing their part in the cosmic order established by Marduk's victory. The gods were not distant, abstract forces, but active participants in human affairs. They had emotions, preferences, and personalities. They could be pleased by proper worship or angered by neglect. They formed relationships with humans, sometimes blessing them with prosperity, sometimes testing them with hardship. This intimate relationship between gods and mortals meant that religious life was woven into every aspect of daily existence. Before eating, Babylonians would offer a portion to the gods. Before beginning work, they would seek divine blessing. Before making important decisions, they would consult priests who could interpret the will of the gods through various forms of divination. The gods of Babylon were thus more than objects of worship. They were cosmic forces that explained the workings of the universe and humanity's place within it. They provided meaning, purpose, and order to lives that might otherwise seem random and chaotic. In their stories, the Babylonians found not just entertainment, but truth about the nature of existence itself. As night fell over the great city, the people would look up at the stars and see the gods looking back. The same divine beings who had created the world continued to watch over it, ensuring that the order won by Marduk's triumph would endure. In this knowledge, the people of Babylon found comfort and slept peacefully under the protection of their celestial guardians. Dreams in cuneiform. In the gentle light of dawn, scribes throughout Babylon would take their places at low tables, soft clay tablets, waiting before them like blank pages, eager for stories. With reeds, styluses in hand, they would begin their daily work of capturing human thoughts in wedge-shaped marks, transforming spoken words into permanent records that would outlast the speakers themselves. The art of writing had begun centuries earlier with simple pictures. A drawing of a bird meant bird, a sketch of water meant water. But as societies grew more complex, so did their need to record abstract ideas, numbers, and sounds. The Babylonians inherited the cuneiform system from their Sumerian predecessors and refined it into something marvelous, a tool that could capture not just objects, but thoughts, emotions, and dreams. Learning to write was a privilege reserved for the few. Young boys from wealthy families would enter the temple schools at age 7, beginning a decade-long journey into literacy. The schoolmaster, stern but caring, would guide them through the hundreds of signs they needed to master. Each sign could represent a word, a syllable, or even an idea, and many signs had multiple meanings that changed depending on context. The students' days began before sunrise with the preparation of clay. They would knead river mud until it reached the perfect consistency, soft enough to take clear impressions, but firm enough to hold its shape. Too wet, and the marks would blur. Too dry, and the stylus would scratch rather than press. Practice tablets filled with the same exercises, generation after generation. Students would copy out lists of words, names of gods, types of birds, parts of the body. They memorized mathematical tables, practiced writing their own names, and copied moral sayings that taught them how to live good lives. A scribe who knows his craft will never lack for food. Read one popular exercise, encouraging the young scholars in their difficult studies. The most talented students would eventually specialize. Some became temple scribes, recording religious ceremonies and maintaining the sacred calendar. Others joined the royal administration, drafting letters to foreign kings or keeping track of tax revenues. The most gifted might become literary scribes, creating new works of poetry and preserving the great epics of the past. These literary scribes were the guardians of humanity's first great stories. They copied and recopied the Epic of Gilgamesh, ensuring that the tale of the hero king and his quest for immortality would survive for future generations. They preserved creation myths, love songs, and wisdom literature, creating libraries that were treasuries of human thought and feeling. But cuneiform was not just for grand literature. The majority of tablets found by archaeologists contain the everyday records of ordinary people. Marriage contracts, business agreements, shopping lists, and personal letters reveal the intimate details of ancient life. A merchant writes to his wife, apologizing for his long absence on a trading journey. A mother sends instructions to her son about managing the family property. A student complains to his parents about the poor food at school. The mathematical tablets show the practical genius of Babylonian scholars. They developed a sophisticated number system based on 60, the same system we still use for measuring time and angles. Their astronomical observations were so accurate that they could predict eclipses centuries in advance. They solved complex algebraic problems and understood geometric principles that would not be rediscovered until much later in history. Medical tablets reveal a culture that combined rational observation with spiritual healing. Babylonian doctors recorded symptoms, treatments, and outcomes with scientific precision. They performed surgery, set broken bones, and created medicines from herbs and minerals. Yet they also recognized that illness could have spiritual causes, requiring prayers and rituals alongside physical treatment. Legal tablets preserve thousands of court cases, showing how Hammurabi's code was applied in practice. Property disputes, inheritance claims, and criminal trials are all documented in careful detail. These records reveal a sophisticated legal system that protected the rights of all citizens, from wealthy merchants to humble farmers. The process of creating a tablet was itself a form of meditation. The scribe would hold the stylus lightly, pressing it into the clay at various angles to create the wedge shapes that formed each sign. The rhythm of writing, press, lift, created a gentle cadence that helped focus the mind. In this quiet concentration, thoughts became permanent. Fleeting words transformed into lasting records. Personal letters reveal the emotional lives of ancient people. A father writes proudly of his son's achievements in school. A business partner expresses concern about a friend's illness. Lovers separated by distance exchange tender messages. These tablets remind us that despite the vast gulf of time, human feelings remain fundamentally unchanged. The tablets were fired in kilns to make them permanent, or sometimes simply dried in the sun if they were meant for temporary use. The most important documents were stored in jars in libraries, carefully organized and catalogued. Some libraries contain thousands of tablets, representing the accumulated knowledge of entire civilizations. Temple scribes maintained detailed records of religious festivals, noting which rituals were performed and which omens were observed. These tablets served as instruction manuals for future ceremonies, ensuring that traditions would be passed down correctly. They also recorded the dreams and visions of priests, believing that the gods communicated through these nighttime messages. Royal scribes faced the challenge of diplomatic correspondence. Letters between kings required careful attention to protocol and etiquette. The wrong phrase could cause offense, the right words could prevent war. These diplomatic tablets show a sophisticated international system where kingdoms from Egypt to Iran maintained regular communication. School tablets often contain practice exercises that seem surprisingly familiar. Students copied out multiplication tables, worked through word problems involving the measurement of fields, and practiced writing formal letters. Teachers would correct mistakes and add encouraging comments, just as educators do today. The scribes saw themselves as servants of Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom. Before beginning work each day, they would offer a brief prayer for skill and accuracy. They understood that their work was sacred, preserving knowledge for future generations and enabling their civilization to function smoothly. As evening approached and the light grew too dim for detailed work, scribes would carefully store their tablets and clean their tools. The clay that remained unused would be re-wetted and saved for tomorrow's work. In this daily cycle of creation and preservation, the written word became humanity's most powerful tool for conquering time and distance. The legacy of these ancient scribes extends far beyond their own era. The uniform tablets these ancient scribes produced give us our most intimate glimpse into everyday existence within humanity's earliest urban society. Because of their meticulous efforts, we're able to listen to the echoes of individuals who existed millennia ago as they conveyed their aspirations, anxieties, visions, and revelations across time's enormous gulf. Within the hushed atmosphere of the tablet house, encircled by countless clay documents, Babylon's scribes undertook one of civilization's most vital responsibilities, converting spoken language into lasting record, guaranteeing that understanding and knowledge would endure far beyond the lives of those who first possessed them. Nebuchadnezzar, the visionary. Multiple centuries following Hammurabi's era of prosperity, Babylon had experienced both triumph and loss. Mighty kingdoms had emerged and crumbled. Military conquerors had arrived and departed, yet the magnificent city persisted. In 605 before the Common Era, a youthful prince called Nebuchadnezzar claimed the throne and initiated the most spectacular period in Babylon's extended chronicle. Right from his earliest moments as monarch, Nebuchadnezzar imagined possibilities on a magnitude that astounded his subjects. He observed the metropolis his forebears had constructed and pictured something even more remarkable, a capital city destined to eclipse every marvel the world had previously witnessed. His visions weren't merely idle daydreams, but actual plans for change that he chased with relentless determination. The new king took control of an empire extending from the Mediterranean all the way to the Persian Gulf. However, he craved more than just territorial expansion. He aimed to establish a civilization worthy of eternal remembrance, a culture positioned to shape the world long after his military forces had faded from memory. In chasing this ambition, he would transform into both architect and warrior, inventor and dominator. Nebuchadnezzar's initial major undertaking involved Babylon's expansion. He commanded the building of fresh fortifications designed to render the city unconquerable. These defensive structures climbed to extraordinary heights, sufficiently broad for teams of 4 horses pulling chariots to sprint along their upper surfaces. The walls functioned not simply as military defenses, but as declarations of authority, proclaiming to anyone who drew near that they were approaching the realm of the planet's mightiest ruler. The king's construction initiatives provided employment for thousands of laborers drawn from throughout his domain. Expert artisans arrived from subjugated lands, contributing their methods and customs to elevate Babylonian building practices. What emerged was a blending of approaches that produced something completely original. Structures that merged the finest characteristics of numerous cultures into one cohesive artistic expression. Yet Nebuchadnezzar represented more than simply a constructor. He stood as a military leader who enlarged his empire through multiple ingenious campaigns. His forces advanced into Syria and Palestine, placing these prosperous territories under Babylonian dominion. The capture of Jerusalem in 586 before the Common Era signified the zenith of his battlefield accomplishments and the start of one of history's most noteworthy population relocations. Jerusalem's siege continued for 18 months, evidence of both the city's resolve and Nebuchadnezzar's persistence. After the fortifications eventually collapsed, the king reached a decision destined to reverberate through the ages. Instead of merely extracting tribute payments, he commanded the city's leadership class to relocate to Babylon. This deportation strategy wasn't motivated by malice, but by strategic thinking. By transporting skilled individuals to his capital, he strengthened his own kingdom while simultaneously preventing future uprisings. Those transported to Babylon included religious leaders, educated scribes, skilled craftspeople, and aristocrats. Precisely those individuals capable of contributing most significantly to the empire's success. They weren't handled as enslaved people, but as precious resources, granted roles in administration and chances to continue their professions. This approach of incorporation rather than subjugation became among Nebuchadnezzar's most significant innovations. The monarch personally found himself captivated by these foreign traditions and their accumulated knowledge. He founded educational institutions where Babylonian and international intellectuals could share perspectives. The royal collection expanded to house writings in countless tongues, transforming Babylon into an educational hub that attracted scholars from across the recognized world. Nebuchadnezzar's royal court achieved legendary status for its grandeur. International diplomats sent reports filled with amazement about feasts presented on golden serving pieces, about green spaces that appeared to hover in mid-air, about fortifications adorned with glazed bricks that sparkled like precious stones. The king grasped that impressive exhibitions of prosperity and strength functioned as tools in international political maneuvering. Still, despite all his worldly achievements, Nebuchadnezzar maintained profound spiritual convictions. He devoted vast resources to sacred undertakings, reconstructing temples and ordering fresh statues of deities. He perceived himself as the God's selected ambassador on earth, accountable for preserving the divine balance that sustained the world's harmony. The king's connection with the deity Marduk proved especially meaningful. He reconstructed Marduk's magnificent temple, the Isagila, rendering it even more splendid than previously. The yearly New Year celebration, where the monarch reaffirmed his legitimacy through sacred ceremony, transformed into a magnificent observance, lasting multiple days and attracting pilgrims from across the empire. Nebuchadnezzar also possessed a mystical dimension that manifested through visions and prophetic experiences. Historical texts document multiple occasions where the monarch encountered prophetic visions requiring explanation by learned advisors. These visions frequently concerned his kingdom's destiny and the world's fate, demonstrating his profound worry about the heritage he'd ultimately leave. His most renowned visions, preserved in the biblical Daniel text, reveal a ruler wrestling with questions about authority and human mortality. The vision of the enormous statue with clay foundations exposed his recognition that even the strongest empires ultimately deteriorate. The vision of the mighty tree being felled conveyed his anxieties regarding worldly achievement's fleeting character. These spiritual preoccupations didn't diminish the king's resolve to construct for permanence. He commissioned artistic and architectural projects intended to survive for millennia. The Ishtar Gate, with its stunning glazed brick carvings of lions and mythical beasts, was designed to generate wonder in observers for countless generations. Every element was conceived with future ages in consideration. The king's technical projects proved equally bold. He ordered construction of a sophisticated canal network delivering fresh water to each city district. Subterranean corridors linked significant structures, permitting protected movement during siege situations. The infrastructure he established sustained a population exceeding any city's previous size. Nebuchadnezzar's impact reached well beyond construction and technical achievement. He standardized measurement systems across his empire, enabling trade and business activity. He created a postal network, allowing swift messaging across enormous distances. His governmental innovations established patterns that subsequent empires would replicate and modify. The monarch reigned for 43 years, outlasting most leaders of his period. Throughout this time, he converted Babylon from a regional authority into the ancient world's marvel. His metropolis became an emblem of human accomplishment, a location where impossibilities seemed routine and visions assumed physical reality. As years accumulated, Nebuchadnezzar devoted increasing time to reflection, frequently strolling through the green spaces he'd created. He would pause alongside the man-made streams and cascading water, listening to flowing water's gentle music, perhaps recalling the simple river that had birthed the earliest communities in this favored territory. The monarch who had envisioned constructing eternity succeeded beyond his most extravagant aspirations. His identity would persist in memory long after his empire's collapse. His city would generate myths for thousands of years, and his conception of Babylon as the world's center would echo through written works and prophecy until time's conclusion. The Hanging Gardens at dusk. As sunlight commenced its decline toward the western edge, throwing extended shadows across Babylon's glorious avenues, the most enigmatic of the city's marvels came to life. The Hanging Gardens, assuming they genuinely existed, would have morphed into a haven of hue and aroma in the soft evening illumination. There, tradition tells us, Queen Amytis discovered comfort for her longing for home, encircled by the verdant hills and flowing waters of her faraway native land. The narrative commences with affection and yearning. Nebuchadnezzar had wed Amytis, a princess from the mountainous realm of Media, to secure a political partnership between their two kingdoms. She arrived at Babylon as a youthful bride, departing the cool forests and rushing waterways of her mountain homeland for Mesopotamia's level, arid lowlands. Initially, the queen found herself impressed by Babylon's spectacular features. The massive fortifications, the soaring ziggurats, and the vibrant Ishtar Gate captivated her with their magnificence. However, as the initial excitement faded and homesickness took hold, she began pining for her youth's landscapes. The river valley's endless flatness dampened her spirits, and she became wan and sorrowful. Nebuchadnezzar, dedicated to his spouse and aware of her sadness, formed an audacious strategy. If transporting Amytis back to her mountains proved impossible, he would transport the mountains to her. He would fashion an artificial terrain that would evoke memories of home, a verdant sanctuary that would ascend above Babylon's level rooftops like an image from her visions. The technical obstacles proved massive. Constructing a multi-tiered garden in territory lacking natural elevation. Variations demanded creative thinking and expert building. The king's designers conceived a sequence of platforms held up by enormous vaulted rooms, fashioning an artificial mountain ascending in stages toward the heavens. The base level demanded exceptional durability to bear the mass of earth, water, and full-grown trees, rising several stories overhead. Substantial walls of fired brick, waterproofed with bitumen and lead sheeting, created chambers sturdy enough to carry tons of soil and rock. These below-ground spaces also fulfilled useful functions, containing the intricate mechanisms required to raise water to the elevated tiers. Generating soil, fertile enough to nurture abundant plant life, necessitated bringing in earth from far-off areas. Trading caravans transported rich loam from Media's mountains, dark soil from river deltas, and thoroughly composted plant matter from across the empire. This valuable material was distributed methodically on each platform, establishing growing medium sufficiently deep for substantial root networks. The water mechanism represented possibly the most brilliant feature of the complete undertaking. A sequence of containers operated by teams of laborers, or potentially by an early gear apparatus, elevated water from the Euphrates River to the topmost platform. From that point, it descended through passages carved into each tier, generating streams and waterfalls that fed the vegetation and supplied the flowing water sound that Amytis longed for from her native land. Vegetation arrived from throughout the recognized world to populate these platforms. Cedar trees from Lebanon, fruit-bearing trees from Persia, blooming vines from remote islands. Each variety selected for its attractiveness, fragrance, or emblematic significance. The gardeners maintaining these uncommon plants were experts transported from numerous territories, each knowledgeable in caring for specific varieties. The bottom platform might have displayed date palms and pomegranate trees, establishing a shade canopy for the tiers overhead. The intermediate platforms could have contained flower gardens organized in elaborate designs, with roses, jasmine, and additional aromatic blossoms saturating the atmosphere with perfume. The uppermost tier might have been designated for the most fragile plants and the queen's personal sanctuary. Pathways curved through the gardens, permitting visitors to ascend from tier to tier while encountering different settings and perspectives. Certain paths received shade from overhanging trees. Others opened onto sunny open areas where exotic flowers flourished in thoughtfully organized beds. Stone seating offered locations to pause and consider the surrounding beauty. The gardens would have achieved maximum beauty during evening hours, when the severe desert sun mellowed into golden illumination. The atmosphere would cool and fill with the evening melodies of birds making their homes in this artificial haven. Peacocks might have roamed the pathways, their spectacular plumage contributing splashes of blue and green to the lush terrain. Water fulfilled a primary function in the garden's attractiveness. Beyond irrigation's practical requirement, flowing water's sound and appearance generated a sensory encounter that transported visitors from the dusty metropolis to an idealized natural realm. Fountains gurgled in concealed groves, streams babbled over ornamental stones, and modest pools mirrored the heavens and adjacent vegetation. The Queen's Pavilion, assuming it existed, would have been positioned at the garden's core, encircled by the most attractive and aromatic plants. There, Amytis could sit beneath imported trees' shade, listening to man-made streams while observing a terrain that recalled her mountain homeland. The pavilion might have been constructed in Persian fashion, with carpets and cushions that additionally enhanced the sensation of being in a different territory. Preserving such a complex garden demanded continual care. Teams of gardeners labored from sunrise to sunset, irrigating plants, trimming growth, substituting deceased specimens, and modifying water flow to satisfy each plant's requirements. This maintenance's expense was tremendous, but Nebuchadnezzar regarded it as a modest cost for his wife's contentment. The gardens achieved renown across the ancient world, drawing visitors from remote territories who came to witness this man-made marvel. Greek historians documented them centuries afterward, incorporating them among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. These descriptions, filtered through time and language translation, constitute the sole proof we possess that the gardens ever existed. Contemporary archaeologists have sought traces of these mythical gardens, but have discovered no definitive proof. Some propose they may have been situated outside Babylon proper, or that they might never have existed whatsoever. Perhaps they were a creation of poetic creativity, an emblem of Babylon's prosperity and authority, rather than an actual location. Yet whether authentic or mythical, the Hanging Gardens capture something significant about Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, a realm where affection motivated grand actions, where technical skill served aesthetic beauty, and where impossibilities seemed attainable. In territory that had mastered making the desert flourish through irrigation and farming, the notion of hanging gardens didn't appear fantastical, merely ambitious. As dusk intensified into nighttime, the gardens would have assumed an almost enchanted character. Oil lamps would brighten the walkways, their wavering light generating dancing silhouettes among the foliage. The atmosphere would be dense with night-blooming flowers' perfume, and water's sound would supply a soft lullaby for the queen's slumber. In her dreams, perhaps Amytis wandered not through man-made platforms, but through her youth's actual mountains. And perhaps Nebuchadnezzar, inspecting his cherished gardens before sleeping, discovered fulfillment in understanding that his affection had generated something beautiful enough to motivate wonder for thousands of years ahead. Ishtar's Gate, Babylon's center. Through ancient Babylon's dusty avenues, every route led to the identical splendid destination. Ascending before visitors like an apparition from the god's own domain stood the Ishtar Gate, a masterwork of glazed brick and golden magnificence that functioned as the ceremonial entrance to the planet's most powerful metropolis. This was where earthly realm met celestial realm, where human grandeur contacted divine brilliance. The gate derived its identity from Ishtar, the goddess of affection and warfare, whose intricate character embodied Babylon's dual nature. Similar to the goddess, the city could be both caring and aggressive, both hospitable to allies and fearsome to adversaries. The gate, carrying her identity, mirrored this duality in every meticulously designed element. From afar, the gate materialized as a barrier of intense blue, a hue so vivid it appeared to radiate with internal luminosity. As travelers approached closer, the genuine artistry became evident. The blue foundation wasn't plain, but adorned with raised carvings of magnificent creatures. Lions sacred to Ishtar, bulls symbolizing the weather deity, Adad, and dragons representing Marduk, Babylon's guardian god. Constructing this marvel demanded abilities that stretched ancient craftsmanship to its boundaries. Expert potters molded each brick manually, guaranteeing perfect alignment and appropriate dimensions. The glazing procedure required accurate regulation of kiln heat and chemical compositions. The deep blue coloring originated from pulverized cobalt, an uncommon and costly mineral requiring importation from remote mining sites. Yellow and white glazes generated the remarkable animal carvings that appeared to march across the gate's surface. Lions prowled in golden splendor, their manes flowing and muscles tensed as though prepared to leap into life. Bulls stood with heads elevated proudly, their horns capturing and reflecting illumination. Dragons, mythical beings existing solely in legend, merged characteristics of serpent, eagle, and lion into creatures of supernatural strength. The gates building commenced during Nebuchadnezzar's administration as part of his magnificent vision for the metropolis. Teams of accomplished artisans labored for years, completing the undertaking, each craftsperson taking satisfaction in contributing to something destined to outlive their own temporary existence. The labor was both devotional and functional, establishing a structure serving the gods while safeguarding the city. The gate itself was genuinely doubled. An exterior and interior entrance divided by a ceremonial pathway permitting complex rituals. This sacred route, surfaced with red and yellow bricks organized in geometric designs, was sufficiently wide for magnificent processions involving hundreds of participants. Throughout religious celebrations, the complete route would be embellished with banners and blossoms. Standing underneath the gate's towering archways, visitors would feel diminished by its magnitude and amazed by its attractiveness. The structure ascended multiple stories upward, its barriers thick enough to contain guard chambers and storage areas. Arrow openings and defensive locations were ingeniously incorporated into the ornamental design, rendering the gate both attractive and militarily practical. The gate's internal surfaces were as thoroughly adorned as the exterior barriers. Refined stone covered the corridors, carved with cuneiform writings praising the deities and glorifying Nebuchadnezzar's accomplishments. The monarch desired everyone passing through his gate to comprehend the authority and devotion of Babylon's leader. Throughout the New Year celebration, the gate transformed into the central point of Babylon's most significant religious observance. The ceremonial route leading through the gate would overflow with priests, aristocrats, and ordinary citizens, all participating in the renewal ceremony, confirming Marduk's dominance and the monarch's divine legitimacy. The intensely colored barriers supplied a magnificent setting for these sacred ceremonies. The gate's sound properties were as thoroughly planned as its visual effect. The arched corridors magnified sounds so that hymns performed within would echo with eerie beauty. The rhythmic sound of horses' hooves, the rumbling of ceremonial chariots, and the priests chanting would reverberate impressively, contributing an auditory element to the gate's splendor. International ambassadors nearing Babylon would observe the gate from miles distant, its blue barriers distinguishing themselves against the brown terrain, like a precious stone positioned in earthen gold. This was deliberate. Nebuchadnezzar desired visitors to grasp Babylon's authority long before reaching the city itself. The gate was a declaration in glazed brick, proclaiming that they were approaching a domain unlike any alternative. The gate's decorative program's symbolic elements transmitted vital religious and political communications. Ishtar's lions reminded observers of the goddess's protective strength over the metropolis. Adad's bulls summoned the storm deity's power in combat. Marduk's dragons announced the supreme god's dominion over both celestial and terrestrial domains. Together, these emblems established a thorough statement of Babylon's divine safeguarding. Merchants and traders, forming the essence of Babylon's economy, would traverse the gate daily with their trading caravans. The sight never diminished its capacity to motivate. These pragmatic individuals, focused on earnings and trading paths, would interrupt their discussions to marvel at the surrounding craftsmanship. The gate reminded everyone that Babylon represented more than simply a business hub. It was a sacred metropolis blessed by the deities. Preserving the gate necessitated continual care. Teams of craftspeople were permanently assigned to repair damaged glazing, cleanse the surfaces, and restore ornamental features worn by climate and time. This continuous maintenance was regarded as a religious obligation as well as a functional requirement. Maintaining the gate's beauty constituted a type of worship. Throughout siege conflicts, the gate functioned as more than simply an ornamental entrance. Its enormous barriers and defensive locations rendered it a formidable barrier for any military force attempting to capture the city. Archers could shower arrows downward on attackers from hidden locations, while the restricted corridors limited the quantity of enemies who could assault the defenses at once. The gate's impact reached far beyond its military and religious purposes. It transformed into an emblem of Babylon itself, reproduced in artistic works and written accounts across the ancient world. International artists attempted to record its attractiveness in their own creations, though none could genuinely communicate the overwhelming effect of witnessing the actual structure personally. At various times throughout the day, the gate exhibited different characters. Dawn illumination would ignite the blue, glazing ablaze with mirrored fire. Midday sunlight would make the hues appear to pulsate with intensity. Evening would mellow the shades into subtle pastels, while nighttime would convert the gate into an enigmatic presence brightened by torches and oil lamps. The gate also fulfilled functional governmental purposes. Tax gatherers maintained offices within its rooms. Customs inspectors examined goods passing through, and guards verified the qualifications of visitors requesting entrance to the metropolis. The gate was therefore a functioning component of Babylon's administrative system as well as an artistic masterwork. Children maturing in Babylon would engage in activities in the gate's shadow, accepting its magnificence for granted in the manner children do. Only after traveling to alternative cities did they recognize how exceptional their hometown genuinely was. The gate had become so integral to their existence that they couldn't envision a city entrance without glazed brick creatures and towering blue barriers. As centuries progressed and Babylon's authority diminished, the gate persisted as evidence of the city's previous glory. Even after political control transferred to alternative powers, visitors continued marveling at this surviving marvel of ancient construction. The gate had surpassed its initial function to become something timeless, an artistic creation that communicated across cultures and generations about human aspiration and divine motivation. In the peaceful moments between daily traffic's activity, when the magnificent plaza before the gate stood vacant except for light and shadows interplay on blue brick, the structure appeared to breathe with the accumulated prayers and visions of all who had traversed beneath its archways. There at Babylon's center, the gate stood as protector and emblem, safeguarding not simply a metropolis, but civilization's very concept itself. The exile of the chosen people. The year stood at 597 before the Common Era. Jerusalem's fortifications gleamed golden in the morning illumination, but shadows accumulated on the distant edge. King Nebuchadnezzar's military forces advanced like a gradual tide across the desert, their bronze spears reflecting light, their footfalls raising dust that descended on olive groves and grain fields. In Judah's palace, King Jehoiachin occupied his throne, merely 18 years of age. His counselors murmured urgent words regarding tribute and capitulation. The young monarch's hands shook as he grasped the royal seal. Outside, children engaged in play in the courtyards, unaware that their existence was about to transform forever. The siege arrived gently initially. Babylonian soldiers encircled the city like a patient embrace. They didn't assault the gates or ignite fires. They simply waited. Days converted to weeks. Food became limited. Water transformed into something precious. Jerusalem's people commenced understanding that their moment had arrived. When the gates ultimately opened, it occurred not with violence, but with acceptance. King Jehoiachin walked outward to encounter his destiny, his purple garments trailing in the dust. Nebuchadnezzar received him with the respect appropriate to a defeated monarch. No restraints were positioned upon the young king's wrists. No severe words were expressed. Jerusalem's conquest was performed like a formal ceremony, each movement calculated and exact. The selection commenced gradually. Babylonian scribes progressed through the city with clay tablets documenting identities. They pursued the skilled ones initially. Craftsmen capable of working gold and silver, scribes able to read and write, musicians capable of performing the lyre and harp. These were the treasures Babylon desired most. Families assembled in the temple courtyard, embracing each other closely. Mothers sang lullabies to soothe their children. Fathers spoke softly of the journey approaching. The elderly provided blessings and prayers. There was weeping, but it was gentle weeping, like rainfall on foliage. 10,000 souls were selected for the march. They packed whatever they could transport: scripture scrolls wrapped in linen, family treasures tucked into bags, children gripped wooden toys and clay dolls. The procession assembled like a river, flowing gradually through Jerusalem's avenues, one final occasion. The journey to Babylon extended across 900 miles of desert and lowland. Dust clouds indicated their movement. At nighttime, campfires spotted the terrain like descended stars. Guards walked among the exiles, but they weren't harsh. Water was distributed. Food was allocated. The ill were transported on carts. Ezekiel the prophet walked among his people, expressing words of reassurance. His voice traveled across the encampment each evening, recounting stories of God's faithfulness. Children assembled around him, their eyes expanded with amazement. Adults discovered comfort in his gentle words. The march transformed into a pilgrimage, each footstep a prayer for what lay ahead. Rivers indicated their advancement. The Jordan was abandoned behind. The Euphrates welcomed them into Mesopotamia. As they traversed that ancient waterway, many shed tears. They were departing their father's territory, approaching a domain of unfamiliar gods and foreign languages. Babylon's fortifications materialized on the distant edge like a golden illusion. Towers extended toward the heavens. Gates sparkled with blue glazed brick. Gardens cascaded over platforms in waterfalls of green. The exiles had never witnessed such magnificence. Their own Jerusalem, attractive as it was, appeared modest and humble by comparison. The city gates opened to accept them. Babylonian residents lined the avenues, inquisitive but not antagonistic. Children indicated the foreign attire. Merchants observed the newcomers with curiosity. Officials directed the procession toward the quarters arranged for them. Settlements were founded along the canals. Houses were constructed with brick and timber. Gardens were cultivated with familiar herbs and vegetables. The exiles weren't imprisoned but settled. They could wed, establish families, and pursue their occupations. Babylon presented them a fresh home, not a prison. By Babylon's waters. The canals of Babylon flowed like liquid silver through the metropolis. Willow trees drooped their branches into the water, establishing shaded alcoves where the exiled could sit and recall. It was underneath these trees that the most beautiful sorrow in all Scripture was created. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. The words emerged from deep in the heart, from a location where homesickness resided like a persistent ache. The psalmist who composed these words understood the particular grief of distance. The manner memory could render the heart both filled and hollow simultaneously. Harps hung silent on the willow branches. These instruments, previously used to praise God in Jerusalem's temple, now functioned as emblems of silence. The exiles had been requested to perform the songs of Zion for their captors' entertainment. But how could they perform the Lord's song in a foreign territory? Their music was prayer, not performance. The request had arrived from Babylonian aristocrats who had learned of Hebrew poetry. They desired to hear the songs that had resonated through Jerusalem's courts. Perhaps they intended no harm. Perhaps they were simply inquisitive about their new residents' culture. But to the exiles, the request felt like mockery. Children born in Babylon would mature hearing these narratives. They would learn of Jerusalem from their parents' recollections, transmitted like precious inheritances. The city would become legendary to them, a golden vision of home they had never witnessed. Yet in their hearts, it would persist as the most genuine place on earth. The canals transported more than water. They transported whispered prayers and midnight tears. They transported the visions of elderly men who spoke of Mount Zion in their sleep. They transported the aspirations of young mothers who instructed their infants. Hebrew words, fearful the language might be forgotten. Markets buzzed with activity, but the exiles progressed through them like spirits. They purchased and sold, labored and earned, but their thoughts persisted elsewhere. Babylon's magnificence encircled them, yet they resided in a Jerusalem of the mind, walking its familiar avenues in memory. Evening brought the most difficult hours. When labor was completed and families assembled, the silence grew thick. Conversations turned to home. Someone would reference the temple courts, the morning sacrifice, the festivals they had observed. Tears would flow like the canal water, steady and endless. Women extracted water from the river, their clay vessels reflecting the sky. As they labored, they sang quietly to themselves. Not the songs of Zion, which were too sacred for common usage, but simple melodies that recalled home. Lullabies their mothers had sung, working songs from harvest time, fragments of beauty preserved in memory. The children adapted first, as children do. They acquired Babylonian customs and Aramaic words. They engaged with local children and discovered new games. But their parents observed with mixed feelings. Each indication of adaptation was both blessing and loss. Their children were surviving, but they were also transforming. Scribes labored carefully to preserve their heritage. They copied the ancient texts word by word, letter by letter. Moses' law was transcribed onto fresh tablets. The Psalms were written in meticulous script. The prophecies were preserved like seeds, awaiting the proper season to flourish. Night brought unfamiliar sounds. Babylonian priests chanted in the distance. Temple bells rang at unfamiliar hours. The calls of foreign birds resonated through the darkness. The exiles lay on their beds, listening to a world that wasn't their own, dreaming of sounds they might never hear again. Some discovered comfort in small rituals. They faced westward when they prayed, toward home's direction. They kept the Sabbath quietly, marking time as their ancestors had. They recounted stories of Abraham and Moses, David and Solomon. These practices became anchors in exile's shifting tide. The psalmist's words captured it all. The sitting by the waters, the weeping at Zion's memory, the harps suspended in silence, the impossible request to perform the Lord's song in a foreign territory, the oath never to forget Jerusalem, even if it meant their right hand would lose its skill and their tongue would adhere to their mouth's roof. In these verses, the complete experience of exile discovered its voice. The pain of separation, the refusal to cheapen what was sacred, the fierce loyalty to a distant home, the determination to remember no matter how much time elapsed or how far they traveled. Daniel's first night, Nebuchadnezzar's palace sparkled like a precious stone in the diminishing light. Young Daniel stood in the courtyard, his travel-stained garments a stark contrast to the refined marble underneath his feet. Fountains murmured their eternal melodies. Peacocks wandered through gardens where flowers bloomed in impossible hues. He was perhaps 14 years of age, selected from among the exiled nobles for his sharp intellect and unblemished character. The Babylonian administrators had searched through the Hebrew captives, pursuing young men capable of being trained in the king's service. Daniel's wisdom had distinguished him from the beginning. The other Hebrew youths assembled around him. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah shared his wonder at the palace's magnificence. They had matured in Jerusalem's courts, but nothing had prepared them for Babylon's splendor. Gold leaf covered every surface. Precious stones were positioned into the walls like stars. Chief Ashpenaz welcomed them with unexpected kindness. His voice was gentle, his manner compassionate. He explained their new lives would be comfortable. They would eat from the king's table, drink the king's wine, and learn the wisdom of the Chaldeans. In 3 years, they would stand before Nebuchadnezzar himself. New names were provided to replace the old ones. Daniel became Belshazzar, a name that honored Babylon's deity, Bel. His friends received similar honors. The Babylonians grasped that changing names could change loyalties. They aimed to remake these Hebrew boys into Babylonian men. The first test arrived at dinner. Servants brought golden dishes filled with rich foods, meat that had been offered to idols, wine that had been blessed by foreign priests. The feast was magnificent, but Daniel's heart grew troubled. To eat would be to compromise. To refuse might mean death. He approached Ashpenaz with careful words. Could they perhaps eat vegetables instead? Drink water rather than wine. The request was made with such courtesy that the chief official found himself considering it. Daniel's wisdom lay not in confrontation, but in discovering gentle paths through difficult terrain. The test was agreed upon. For 10 days, Daniel and his friends would eat only vegetables and drink only water. The other students would feast on the king's delicacies. At the end, their health would be compared. It was a dangerous gamble, but Daniel trusted in something greater than palace food. Their quarters were luxurious beyond imagining. Silk curtains hung from cedar beams. Carpets from distant lands covered the floors. Each young man had servants to attend his needs. Yet Daniel found peace not in these comforts, but in the quiet moments when he could pray to the God of his fathers. The library amazed him most. Scrolls covered every wall, containing wisdom of ages, mathematics and astronomy, medicine and law, the accumulated knowledge of the greatest empire on earth. Daniel approached these texts with a scholar's hunger, drinking in, learning like a man dying of thirst. His teachers were the wisest men in Babylon. They spoke of star charts and dream interpretation. They taught the mysteries of divination and the secrets of the Magi. Daniel learned it all, but he never forgot the source of true wisdom. His God was greater than all the learning of men. The 10 days elapsed quickly. When the test concluded, Daniel and his friends stood before their examiner. Their skin glowed with health. Their eyes were bright and clear. They had grown stronger on vegetables and water than their companions had on royal delicacies. The chief official marveled at what he witnessed. Word of the Hebrew youths spread through the palace. They were not only healthy, but remarkably intelligent. In every subject they studied, they excelled beyond their peers. Their teachers whispered that they appeared to have divine help. Knowledge came to them as easily as breathing. Daniel discovered he had a special gift. Dreams that puzzled the wise men made perfect sense to him. Visions that seemed like riddles revealed their secrets at his touch. God had given him the key to mysteries that had baffled scholars for generations. The other students observed him with mixed emotions. Some were envious of his abilities, others were drawn to his gentle wisdom. Daniel never boasted of his gifts or claimed credit for his success. He spoke always of the God who had blessed him, the same God who had watched over his people in exile. At night-time, when the palace grew quiet, Daniel would stand at his window and look toward the west. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay Jerusalem, the city of his birth. His body resided in Babylon, but his heart remained with his people. He prayed for them each evening, asking God to remember his covenant and bring them home. The 3 years of training stretched ahead like a long journey. Daniel understood he was being prepared for something greater than he could imagine. The God who had delivered him from compromise in small things would use him for larger purposes. He was content to wait, to learn, and to serve faithfully in whatever role he was given. The king's forgotten dream. Sleep evaded King Nebuchadnezzar like a timid bird that wouldn't be captured. He tossed upon his golden bed, his mind churning with images he couldn't quite grasp. In the night's depths, a vision had visited him, vivid and terrible. But when dawn broke over Babylon's towers, the dream had vanished like mist. The king rose with the sun, his heart heavy with unease. Something important had visited him in sleep, something that demanded understanding. He could feel its weight pressing upon his spirit, but its meaning remained hidden. The harder he tried to remember, the more elusive it became. Royal summons went out across the city. Every wise man in Babylon was commanded to appear before the throne. Magicians and astrologers hurried through the streets, their robes billowing behind them. Soothsayers and enchanters gathered in the palace courtyard, whispering among themselves about the king's mysterious request. They assembled in the great hall, an impressive gathering of learned men, beards white with age, eyes bright with accumulated wisdom. These were the scholars who had served the crown for decades, interpreting dreams and reading omens. They had never failed to satisfy a royal request. Nebuchadnezzar entered like a storm cloud, his presence filling the vast chamber. Guards flanked him, their spears gleaming in the morning light. The king's face bore the marks of a sleepless night. His eyes held a desperate intensity that made the wise men shift uncomfortably. "I have dreamed a dream," the king announced, his voice echoing off marble walls, "and my spirit is troubled to know the dream." The assembled scholars nodded knowingly. Dream interpretation was their specialty. They had studied the ancient texts, memorized the traditional meanings. They were ready to serve. But then came the king's shocking demand. "Tell me the dream and its interpretation." The wise men exchanged glances of confusion. Normally the dreamer would recount his vision and they would explain its meaning. But Nebuchadnezzar was asking them to reveal both the dream and its interpretation. It was impossible. The chief magician stepped forward, his voice carefully respectful. "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." It was a reasonable request, the way these things had always been done. But the king's response struck them like thunder. "The thing is gone from me," Nebuchadnezzar declared. "If you will not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill." The threat hung in the air like incense, heavy and ominous. The king's forgetting had become their death sentence. Terror gripped the assembled scholars. They had built their careers on interpreting dreams, but they had never been asked to read the king's mind. They protested that no king had ever made such a request. They argued that only the gods could reveal such secrets. But Nebuchadnezzar remained unmoved. "I know that you would gain time," the king accused, "because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known to me the dream, there is but one decree for you." His patience was exhausted. If his wise men couldn't help him, what good were they? The magicians made one final plea. "There is not a man upon the earth who can show the king's matter," they declared. "Therefore, there is no king, lord, or ruler who has asked such things of any magician or astrologer or Chaldean." Their words rang with desperate truth, but truth wouldn't save them. Captain Arioch received the king's command with heavy heart. The decree was clear. All the wise men of Babylon were to be executed. He began gathering soldiers, preparing for the grim task ahead. The greatest minds in the empire would perish because they couldn't read thoughts. Word of the death sentence spread through the city like wildfire. Families of the condemned gathered in the streets, weeping and pleading. The wise men themselves sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend their fate. They had served faithfully for years, but their knowledge had proven worthless when it mattered most. Among those marked for death was young Daniel. He had completed his training and was now counted among the king's wise men. When Captain Arioch came to arrest him, Daniel received the news with remarkable calm. He asked for time to seek the answer the king demanded. That night, Daniel gathered his 3 friends in urgent prayer. They knelt together in the quiet of their chambers, crying out to the God of heaven for mercy. They asked for revelation, for the secret that would save not only their lives, but the lives of all Babylon's scholars. Their prayers rose like incense in the darkness. As dawn approached, the answer came. In a night vision, God revealed to Daniel both the king's forgotten dream and its meaning. The young Hebrew rose from his knees with joy, his heart filled with gratitude. The God of Israel had once again shown his power in the heart of a pagan empire, the fiery furnace. The golden image stood 90 feet tall on the plain of Dura, its surface gleaming like captured sunlight. King Nebuchadnezzar had commanded its construction after his troubling dream, perhaps hoping to control his own destiny through this magnificent display of power. The statue dominated the landscape, visible from miles away. Musicians gathered at its base, their instruments polished and ready. Harps and lyres caught the morning breeze. Drums waited in patient silence. Flutes and pipes lay carefully arranged on silk cushions. When the signal came, their music would ring across the plain, calling all people to worship. The royal decree had gone out to every corner of the empire. All officials, great and small, were commanded to attend the dedication ceremony. Princes and governors traveled from distant provinces. Captains and judges left their courts. Treasurers and counselors abandoned their duties. Babylon's power was on display. The crowd gathered like a human sea on the plain. Thousands upon thousands of people spread across the flat ground, their colorful robes creating a living tapestry. Children clung to their parents' hands. Elderly officials found shade where they could. The anticipation was thick as honey in the air. Herald voices rang out across the multitude, their words echoing from person to person. To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. The penalty for disobedience was announced with equal clarity. Anyone who refused to bow would be cast immediately into a burning, fiery furnace. The threat wasn't idle. A great furnace had been prepared nearby, its flames already leaping toward the sky. The heat could be felt even at a distance. Among the crowd stood 3 young men whose names had been changed, but whose hearts remained unchanged. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had risen high in Babylon's government, but their loyalty to the God of Israel had never wavered. They faced the golden image with calm resolve. The moment of testing arrived with the first note of music. The horn sounded its deep, resonant call. Flutes joined in with their sweet melody. Harps added their silver voices to the song. The symphony swelled across the plain like a tide, beautiful and terrible at once. As one, the vast multitude fell to their knees, faces pressed against the earth, hands stretched toward the golden statue. The plain became a carpet of prostrate bodies, all bowing before Nebuchadnezzar's creation. The king watched from his pavilion, satisfaction warming his heart. But 3 figures remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood straight as cedars, while the world around them bowed. Their quiet defiance was visible from the royal platform. Babylonian officials pointed them out to the king, their voices urgent with accusation. "O Nebuchadnezzar, live forever," the accusers declared. "You have made a decree that everyone who hears the music shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace." Their words dripped with righteous indignation. The king's face darkened like a storm cloud. These 3 men had been his trusted servants, promoted to high positions in his government. He had treated them with favor and respect. Now they dared to defy his direct command in front of the entire empire. His fury blazed more intensely than the furnace that had been readied. "Is this the truth, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you refuse to serve my gods or bow before the golden image I erected?" The monarch's words rang out across the plain, broadcasting the charge for all to hear. He granted them one last opportunity to reconsider their stance. The 3 companions remained side by side, their expressions calm in the face of deadly peril. Their decision had been formed long before, during quiet hours devoted to prayer and scripture. Their God surpassed any earthly monarch, wielded greater power than any threat could hold. They refused to bow before an idol fashioned by mortal hands. "O Nebuchadnezzar, there is no need for us to defend ourselves before you in this affair," Shadrach responded, his tone unwavering and strong. "Should this be the case, the God we worship can rescue us from the blazing, fiery furnace, and he will rescue us from your power, O king." Their conviction resonated like the clear ring of a bell. "However, even if he does not," Meshach added, "understand this, O king. We will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden image you have erected." These words determined their destiny. They placed their complete trust in God, regardless of whether he chose to deliver them or not. Nebuchadnezzar's rage intensified beyond all measure. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times beyond its normal temperature. The flames roared upward, visible to every person assembled. The heat grew so extreme that the soldiers who bound the three men perished from its strength. Yet, as the king observed through the furnace opening, his anger transformed into astonishment. 4 figures walked amid the flames, not merely 3. The fourth appeared like a divine being, radiating heavenly light. The fire held no authority over them. Not a single hair was burned, not one piece of clothing harmed. They moved through the flames as though walking through a pleasant garden, the tree that reached toward heaven. Peace had descended upon Babylon like a soft covering. The empire extended from where the sun rises to where it sets, its boundaries protected and its inhabitants satisfied. King Nebuchadnezzar strolled through his palace gardens, taking in the prosperity surrounding him on every side, his chest filled with pride at everything he had achieved. The hanging gardens descended in terraced splendor, water flowing in streams of silver. Flowers from distant lands bloomed in colors that defied imagination. Fruit-bearing trees carried their burden of sweetness. Birds called from every limb, their songs merging into a harmony of satisfaction. The king paused to inhale the fragrance of jasmine mingled with rose. During this season of victory, sleep delivered another vision. Nebuchadnezzar rested upon his bed, adorned with gold and ivory, his physical form at ease, yet his mind remained receptive to heavenly messages. Within the domain of dreams, God addressed both kings and common people, employing the language of symbols and images. The dream opened with a tree, no ordinary tree, but one growing with supernatural vigor. Its trunk expanded with each moment that passed, its branches extended like arms of welcome, its foliage whispered with vitality, becoming increasingly green and plentiful. The tree climbed toward the heavens themselves, its uppermost branches touching the clouds. From his elevated position, the king observed the tree's extraordinary growth. Its shade blanketed the earth. Wild creatures discovered refuge beneath its limbs. Birds built their nests among its boughs. The entire world drew sustenance from its fruit. The tree had become creation's focal point, providing for every living creature. Then a voice descended from heaven, awesome in its power. A holy messenger came down from the celestial sphere, his presence causing the very air to quiver. His declaration thundered across the landscape of the dream. Cut down the tree and sever its branches. Strip away its leaves and scatter its fruit. The divine instruction continued with precise determination. Let the animals flee from beneath it and the birds from its branches. However, leave the stump with its roots in the earth, bound with iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field, and let it be moistened with heaven's dew, and let his share be with the animals in the earth's grass. The messenger's voice grew more solemn still. Let his heart be transformed from that of a man, and let an animal's heart be granted to him, and let 7 periods pass over him. This decision comes by decree of the watchers, this verdict by word of the holy ones, so that the living may understand that the Most High governs the kingdom of humanity. Nebuchadnezzar awakened suddenly, his heart beating like thunder. The dream clung to his awareness with frightening vividness. Unlike his earlier vision, this one stayed clear in every particular. The tree, the messenger, the divine verdict, all of it burned in his recollection like marks of flame. Terror crept into the monarch's heart like an icy wind. He grasped enough about divine messages to recognize that this dream carried a personal warning. The tree touching the sky, the one sheltering the world, might it symbolize his own empire, his own being? The thought filled him with alarm. Once more, Babylon's wise advisors were called to the royal chamber. They arrived with confident expressions, assured of their capabilities. The king's earlier dream had been successfully decoded by the young Hebrew Daniel. Surely, this vision would prove equally manageable. However, when Nebuchadnezzar described his dream, silence descended over the gathering like a burial cloth. The wise men exchanged anxious looks. They understood the imagery sufficiently to recognize this was no typical royal vision. This represented a judgment dream, and nobody wished to deliver such tidings. Daniel came to the palace with his characteristic quiet composure. The king welcomed him with particular respect, recalling the young man's earlier assistance. Belshazzar, the king stated, employing Daniel's Babylonian title, "I recognize that the spirit of the holy gods dwells within you, and no mystery troubles you. Reveal to me the visions of my dream and its meaning." As Daniel absorbed the dream's particulars, his expression grew concerned. For an entire hour, he remained in thoughtful silence, his mind grappling with the vision's significance. The king watched him with mounting worry, recognizing the gravity of what was being unveiled. At last, Daniel spoke. His voice weighted with empathy. "My lord, may the dream belong to those who oppose you, and its interpretation to your adversaries." He wished the prophecy could fall upon Babylon's enemies rather than the king himself, yet divine truth cannot be modified by human wishes. The meaning revealed itself like a scroll of fate. The magnificent tree indeed represented Nebuchadnezzar himself. His realm had expanded until it reached the heavens. His authority stretched to the earth's extremities. His might sheltered nations and provided for peoples. Yet arrogance had taken hold in his heart, and judgment would come. The tree's destruction signified the king would lose both his mind and his crown. He would be expelled from human community to live among the animals of the field. His intellect would become like that of a beast. 7 years would elapse in this state until he learned that the Most High God rules over all earthly realms. Still, mercy was interwoven with the message of judgment. The stump would be preserved, secured with iron and bronze. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom would be maintained, awaiting his recovery. When he acknowledged God's supreme authority, both his sanity and his throne would be restored to him. Daniel's voice conveyed both grief and hope as he finished his interpretation. "Therefore, O king, may my advice be pleasing to you. Turn from your wrongdoings through righteousness, and from your injustices by demonstrating compassion to the poor, if perhaps your prosperity may be extended." The madness in the garden, 12 months turned like pages in a chronicle. The seasons shifted from spring through summer, through autumn, through winter, and returned to spring once more. King Nebuchadnezzar conducted his royal responsibilities, yet Daniel's declarations echoed through the halls of his recollection. The dream of the great tree remained vivid, a persistent reminder of divine caution. The king found himself pausing frequently during his garden walks, examining the trees growing there. Each one appeared to whisper of the vision. The Lebanon cedar with its spreading limbs, the date palm with its crown of leaves, the fig tree laden with fruit, all brought to mind the tree in his dream, the one heaven's command had felled. Nevertheless, as the months progressed, the warning appeared to diminish. The kingdom flourished under his governance. Tribute arrived from faraway territories. Construction projects transformed Babylon into a marvel of civilization. The king's pride, which had been shaken by the dream, started to reassert itself like vegetation growing in rich earth. The palace rooftop garden became his preferred sanctuary. Here, elevated above the city, he could survey everything his efforts had constructed. The hanging gardens cascaded beneath him in terraced magnificence. The wide boulevards extended toward the distant horizon. The temples and towers proclaimed his magnificence to the world. It presented a scene to fill any person's heart with gratification. On that decisive day, the sun blazed with unusual brightness. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of the garden's trees. The king stood at the wall's edge, gazing out over his domain, with eyes perceiving only his personal achievements. The moment had arrived when pride would reach its deadly culmination. "Is this not mighty Babylon?" he proclaimed to the wind and heavens, "which I have constructed for the royal residence by my power's strength and for my majesty's glory?" The words dropped from his mouth like stones into calm water, sending ripples through the spiritual dimension. The response came immediately and terribly. While the declaration was still on his lips, a voice descended from heaven like thunder. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, To you this is declared, the kingdom has been taken from you. The announcement echoed across the garden, though only the monarch could perceive it. And they will expel you from humanity, the voice proceeded, and your home will be among the field's beasts. They will cause you to consume grass like cattle, and 7 periods will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High governs humanity's kingdom and grants it to whomever he selects. In that very moment, the judgment descended. The king's rational consciousness, which had commanded military forces and dispensed justice, started to shatter like a broken looking-glass. His thoughts dispersed like leaves before a tempest. The carefully built identity of a ruler dissolved into bewilderment and fear. The transformation occurred swiftly and thoroughly. Nebuchadnezzar's courtly behavior vanished. His regal bearing collapsed. He gazed at his hands as though viewing them for the first time, then at the gardens surrounding him with eyes no longer comprehending civilization. The monarch of Babylon had become something entirely different. His attendants observed in horror as their master descended to his hands and knees. He started tearing at the grass with his teeth, consuming it like a grazing creature. His royal garments became soiled and ripped. His meticulously groomed beard grew wild and disheveled. The spectacle proved too dreadful for the court to observe. Quietly, methodically, the palace organization moved to contain the emergency. The king was guided away from public sight, his condition concealed from the populace. Officials murmured of a temporary ailment, a phase of rest and recuperation. However, those witnessing him understood that something far more significant had transpired. The gardens transformed into his wilderness. Within the extensive palace grounds, Nebuchadnezzar roamed like a displaced spirit. He no longer recognized the servants who had previously attended him. He feared the structures he had ordered constructed. His existence had diminished to the immediate sensations of hunger, thirst, and the texture of grass beneath his palms. His hair extended long and untamed, like an eagle's plumage. His nails transformed into claw-like formations, hardened by his new manner of living. The royal body grew thin and tanned from exposure to sun and precipitation. He who had previously dressed in purple and fine fabric now wore only the elements as his covering. Rain descended upon him without awareness. He learned to seek protection under the spreading trees, pressing against their trunks like any forest dweller. Morning's dew became his beverage. The fruits dropping from the trees became his nourishment. He existed as the field's animals existed, directed by instinct rather than reasoning. The court sustained its operations around his absence. Reliable counselors managed the kingdom, following the statutes he had created. The great mechanism of empire continued operating, yet its center was absent. Officials spoke in hushed voices of the king's state, praying for his recovery. Seasons revolved in their timeless pattern. Spring delivered new grass for his consumption. Summer offered fruits and shade. Autumn distributed seeds and nuts for his sustenance. Winter instructed him to seek warmth in sheltered locations. 7 times the pattern repeated, marking his judgment's duration. Throughout all the untamed years, something stayed unchanging. Deep within the king's altered consciousness, a small spark of awareness flickered. He could not reason as humans reason, yet he could sense the presence of something beyond himself. The God who had delivered judgment was also the God preserving life. The garden that had previously been his pride transformed into his instructor. The trees that had reminded him of his dream now provided him shelter in actuality. The grass he had once appreciated for its beauty now sustained him as nourishment. Creation itself became his sanctuary, teaching him lessons no royal education could supply. In the 7th year, as spring returned to the garden, something stirred in the depths of his awareness. Like a person awakening from an extended dream, Nebuchadnezzar started remembering who he had been. The fog of insanity lifted gradually, revealing the sky above him and the comprehension that had been absent for so long. Belshazzar's feast. The evening air hung dense with incense and wine as 1,000 nobles assembled in Babylon's most magnificent chamber. King Belshazzar had ordered a feast to surpass all feasts, a celebration of authority that would be recalled for generations. Golden containers filled every table, their surfaces catching the light of innumerable oil lamps. The noise of laughter and music bounced off marble surfaces. Belshazzar was not Nebuchadnezzar's biological son, yet he governed as his successor. Young and arrogant, he had inherited an empire at its zenith. The wealth of nations poured into Babylon's coffers. The city's fortifications had never been penetrated. The king felt unconquerable as he lifted his goblet to toast another evening of revelry. The wine poured like rivers through the grand hall. Servants moved among the tables with vessels and containers, maintaining every cup filled. The vintage was the empire's finest, aged in royal cellars for many years. It loosened tongues and elevated spirits, transforming the feast into a celebration of joy. Musicians performed from elevated platforms, their melodies threading through the conversations. Harps sang their silvery songs. Drums struck rhythms that caused the heart to dance. Flutes whistled like birds, calling from faraway gardens. The music was a living entity, binding the celebration together with strands of harmony. Dancers moved among the tables like flowing water. Their silk garments captured the lamplight, creating patterns of color and darkness. Bells on their ankles rang with each movement. Their gestures told stories without speech, ancient tales of deities and champions, love and triumph. As the evening progressed, Belshazzar's disposition grew more audacious. The wine had warmed his blood and awakened his arrogance. He surveyed the splendor encircling him and experienced the intoxication of unlimited authority. An idea took shape in his wine-fogged mind, a gesture that would crown the evening's magnificence. "Bring out the golden containers," he ordered, his voice penetrating the noise of celebration. "The containers that my father Nebuchadnezzar removed from the temple in Jerusalem." A stillness descended over the closest tables as his declarations spread through the chamber. The sacred containers had been stored in Babylon's treasury for many years. They were the holy implements of Solomon's temple, fashioned for the worship of the Hebrew deity. Gold cups and silver bowls, each one consecrated for sacred purposes. No Babylonian hand had ventured to touch them for common use. Servants rushed to fulfill the royal order. They returned, carrying the temple treasures, their expressions troubled by the assignment. The containers gleamed in the lamplight, more magnificent than anything created by Babylonian craftsmen. They appeared to possess an aura of holiness that altered the very air. Belshazzar grasped the largest golden cup with enthusiastic hands. It had previously held wine for the temple offerings, blessed by Hebrew priests in Jerusalem's courts. Now it would fulfill a different function. The king filled it with Babylon's finest vintage and lifted it high overhead. "To the gods of gold and silver," he proclaimed, his voice resounding through the hall. "To the gods of bronze and iron, of wood and stone." The nobles applauded and lifted their own cups, following their king's lead. They drank deeply, their laughter echoing off the surfaces. The sacred containers passed from person to person. Lords and ladies filled them with wine and drank in tribute to Babylon's deities. The cups that had previously held the blood of sacrificial lambs now held the wine of a pagan celebration. The bowls that had caught holy oil now shimmered with ordinary wine. In that instant of ultimate sacrilege, something shifted in the hall. The air grew dense and oppressive, as though a tempest were approaching. The laughter appeared forced, the music strained. A chill passed through the room despite the warmth of 1,000 oil lamps. Then it materialized. A hand severed at the wrist, floating upon the plastered surface. No body was apparent, no arm to direct it, merely fingers moving with deliberate intention, tracing letters in a script nobody could interpret. The lamplight caught the moving digits, making them appear to glow with internal fire. The hall became silent as death itself. Goblets slipped from powerless fingers, food turned to dust in open mouths. Every eye focused upon the ghostly hand as it continued its mysterious task. 4 words materialized on the surface, inscribed in characters that appeared to burn themselves into the plaster. King Belshazzar's face lost all color, his knees struck together beneath the table. His hands trembled so intensely that wine poured from his cup like blood from a wound. The courage wine had provided him evaporated like mist before morning sun. "Summon the astrologers," he cried, his voice breaking with terror. "Bring the Chaldeans and the soothsayers." The order spread through the palace like wildfire. Every wise person in Babylon was called to interpret the writing that had materialized so mysteriously. They arrived running, their robes billowing behind them. The greatest scholars in the empire assembled before the surface, squinting at the strange script. They whispered amongst themselves, consulting ancient texts and comparing interpretations. Yet the writing stayed as mysterious as when it first materialized. The letters appeared to shift and dance before their vision. Some believed they recognized Aramaic characters. Others perceived ancient Sumerian script. A few claimed the writing resembled Egyptian hieroglyphs, yet none could agree on what the words actually conveyed. Hours elapsed in fruitless discussion. The wise men argued and consulted, yet the meaning stayed concealed. The king's terror increased with each passing instant. He had promised rich rewards for interpretation. Purple robes, golden chains, third position in the kingdom, yet no measure of treasure could unlock the mystery. Finally, the Queen Mother entered the hall. She had not attended the feast, perhaps sensing the danger in such revelry. Her aged eyes absorbed the scene, the scattered containers, the terrified king, the mysterious writing on the surface. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "O king, live forever," she stated with dignity that commanded attention. "Let not your thoughts disturb you, nor let your expression change. There exists a man in your kingdom in whom dwells the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was discovered in him." She spoke of Daniel, the Hebrew who had served Nebuchadnezzar so faithfully. In him was discovered an exceptional spirit, knowledge, understanding, and the capacity to interpret dreams and solve riddles. If anyone could read the writing on the surface, it would be this man who had served the royal house for many years. The summons went out into the night. Daniel, now an elderly man with silver in his beard, was brought before the terrified king. He entered the hall with quiet dignity, his eyes absorbing the scene of debauchery and fear. The sacred containers caught his attention, and sorrow flickered across his weathered face. Belshazzar's voice trembled as he made his desperate appeal. "If you can interpret this writing and make known to me its meaning, you shall be dressed in scarlet and have a chain of gold around your neck and shall be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom." The offer was generous, yet Daniel had served God too long to be influenced by earthly rewards. The lion's den. Years had elapsed since the writing materialized on Belshazzar's surface. The Babylonian Empire had fallen to the Persians, precisely as Daniel had predicted. King Cyrus governed with wisdom and compassion, yet it was his successor, Darius, who would face the greatest challenge of his reign. The challenge would arise not from foreign armies, but from the faith of one elderly man. Daniel had served faithfully under 3 empires. His hair was now white as winter snow, his face marked with the wisdom of decades. Yet his mind stayed sharp as a blade, his spirit unbroken by the passing years. The new Persian administration had recognized his worth, promoting him to high office once more. The kingdom was separated into provinces, each governed by a president appointed by the monarch. Daniel was chief among these leaders, placed over all the others because of his exceptional spirit. The younger officials observed him with conflicting emotions: respect for his capabilities, envy for his position, and frustration at his incorruptible character. They searched for flaws in his administration, like prospectors hunting for gold. His finances were examined down to the smallest coin. His official decisions were scrutinized for signs of favoritism or corruption. His personal life was investigated for any hint of scandal, yet they discovered nothing. Daniel's integrity was like armor, protecting him from every accusation. The Persian officials assembled in secret councils, their voices low with conspiracy. "We will not discover any accusation against this Daniel," they admitted reluctantly, "unless we discover it against him concerning the law of his God." His faithfulness to the Hebrew faith was well recognized throughout the kingdom. A plan formed in their whispered conversations. They would use Daniel's devotion against him, turning his greatest strength into his downfall. The trap they designed was elegant in its simplicity. They would make prayer itself a crime, knowing Daniel would never abandon his daily communion with God. They approached King Darius with smooth words and false concern. "O king, live forever," they began, their voices heavy with feigned loyalty. "All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree." The proposed law appeared reasonable on its surface. For 30 days, nobody in the kingdom should pray to any deity or person except King Darius himself. Anyone violating this decree would be cast into the lion's den. It appeared to be a test of loyalty, a way to unify the diverse kingdom under Persian governance. Darius was flattered by the proposal. The idea that his subjects would pray only to him for a month appealed to his royal pride. He failed to perceive the trap that had been carefully laid, the net that would soon entangle his most faithful servant. The king signed the decree with his royal seal, making it unalterable according to the law of the Medes and Persians. Daniel learned of the new law within hours of its signing. The news reached him as he sat in his chamber, reviewing the day's administrative duties. His servants whispered the details with worried expressions, knowing their master's habits. For decades, he had prayed 3 times daily, facing toward Jerusalem. The law made this practice punishable by death. The old man received the news with perfect composure. He thanked his servants for their warning, then dismissed them gently. Alone in his chamber, he considered his options. He could pray in secret, hiding his devotion from observing eyes. He could suspend his prayers for 30 days, resuming them when the decree expired, or he could continue as he always had, trusting God with the consequences. The choice was never truly in doubt. Daniel had served his God faithfully for over 70 years. He had faced the furnace of persecution, the lion's den of exile, the flames of political intrigue. His faith had been tested in fire and found pure. He would not compromise now in the twilight of his life. That evening, Daniel knelt at his window as he had for decades. The shutters remained open as they had always been. His face turned toward Jerusalem, as was his custom. His voice rose in familiar prayers, seeking God's blessing on the kingdom, protection for his people, and wisdom for the challenges ahead. The conspirators observed from hiding places across the street. They saw. He realized immediately that he had been manipulated, that his pride had been employed as a weapon against his most faithful servant. The decree he had signed in vanity now threatened to destroy the man he valued most. Yet, the law of the Medes and Persians could not be changed, even by the king who had made it. The remainder of that day passed like a nightmare. Darius labored till sunset, seeking some legal loophole that might preserve Daniel's life. He consulted with lawyers and scholars, searched ancient precedents, and explored every possible escape. Yet the law stood firm, immutable as carved stone. As evening shadows lengthened, the accusers returned to the palace. Their voices carried the weight of inevitability. "Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establishes may be changed." The trap was complete. Even royal authority could not undo what royal pride had created. The fall of Babylon. The night was still and quiet when the waters started to descend. Along the banks of the Euphrates River, Persian engineers worked in silence, their shovels and picks redirecting the ancient flow. King Cyrus had planned his conquest with the patience of a master strategist. While Babylon feasted, his army prepared to walk where water once ran. The great city slept behind fortifications that had never been breached. These ramparts rose like cliffs from the desert floor, wide enough for chariots to race along their tops. Guard towers punctuated their length like stone sentinels, their watchmen confident in Babylon's impregnability. No army had ever taken the city by storm. Cyrus understood that force alone would not open Babylon's gates. The Persian king had studied his enemy with the care of a scholar, learning the city's strengths and weaknesses. The Euphrates flowed directly through Babylon's heart, providing water, yet also creating a potential path for those clever enough to use it. His plan was elegant in its simplicity. Miles upstream from the city, Persian workers had dug channels and constructed dams. When the signal arrived, they would divert the river into new courses, lowering the water level within Babylon itself. The riverbed would become a highway for conquest. Inside the city, Belshazzar's feast continued in glorious oblivion. The sacred containers gleamed in the lamplight, filled with wine and laughter. The mysterious writing on the surface had been interpreted, yet its warning seemed distant as a half-remembered dream. Death felt impossible in a hall filled with such life and luxury. Daniel's words echoed in the king's memory like the tolling of a bell. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Yet wine and music had a way of drowning out prophecy. The water level dropped foot by foot throughout the long night. Persian soldiers assembled at appointed places along the riverbank, waiting for the signal to advance. They had muffled their weapons and darkened their armor. This victory would be won by stealth, not strength. Babylon's river gates were massive bronze barriers that rose and fell with the water level. As the Euphrates receded, gaps appeared beneath these fortifications. What had been impossible became merely difficult. What had been impregnable became penetrable. The first Persian scouts slipped through the muddy gap like ghosts. They found themselves in the city's heart, surrounded by sleeping buildings and empty streets. Most citizens had no idea that enemy soldiers now walked among them. The conquest had begun without a battle cry or clash of arms. More soldiers followed, their numbers growing with each passing hour. They moved through Babylon's districts like a slow tide, securing key positions and surrounding important buildings. The palace quarter was isolated, the temple complex was surrounded, the city was being conquered from within. Dawn found Babylon changed forever. Persian banners flew from the fortifications where Babylonian eagles had perched for centuries. The gates stood open, their massive doors swinging freely for the first time in decades. Citizens emerged from their homes to find a new empire governing their streets. Cyrus entered his conquest with the dignity of a true king. No buildings were burned. No citizens were harmed. No treasures were looted for personal gain. The Persian king understood that empires were ruled by consent as much as force. His victory would be remembered for its mercy. The palace surrendered without resistance. Belshazzar had vanished in the night, perhaps killed in the confusion or fled to distant provinces. His courtiers knelt before the new ruler, offering their submission with the pragmatic wisdom of survivors. The feast hall stood empty, its golden containers scattered like leaves. Royal scribes worked quickly to establish the new order. Decrees went out in multiple languages, assuring the people of Babylon that their lives would continue much as before. Persian law would replace Babylonian custom, yet gradually and with respect for local traditions. Daniel was summoned to the palace in those first days of transition. The old prophet approached the throne room with measured steps, his white beard flowing like silk. He had served under Babylonian kings for 70 years. Now he would offer his wisdom to Persian rulers. Cyrus received him with the honor due to a sage. The Persian king had heard of Daniel's reputation for wisdom and integrity. He needed such men to help govern his vast empire, administrators who could be trusted with power and responsibility. The Hebrew prophet represented continuity in a time of change. "Your God has given me all the kingdoms of the earth," Cyrus told Daniel, his words echoing ancient prophecies. "He has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah." The king's decree would soon permit the Hebrew exiles to return to their homeland, carrying with them treasures and hopes. The changeover was remarkably peaceful. Persian officials replaced Babylonian governors with quiet efficiency. New laws were published and explained. Trade routes remained open. Life in the great city continued its ancient rhythm, yet under new management and with new possibilities. Babylon's fall marked the end of an era. For centuries, the city had been the center of the known world, its influence reaching from Egypt to India. Its scholars had mapped the stars and calculated the movements of planets. Its merchants had carried goods and ideas across continents. Its power had seemed eternal. Yet, like all earthly kingdoms, it had proven temporary. The fortifications that seemed impregnable had been bypassed. The waters that provided security had become highways for conquest. The pride that sustained its glory had blinded its leaders to approaching danger. In a single night, the world's greatest city had become a Persian province. The transition taught lessons that wise men would remember for generations. Empires rise and fall like waves on the shore. Fortifications cannot protect hearts hardened by pride. True security comes not from military might, but from divine favor. The God who raises up kingdoms can also bring them down. Babylon would continue to exist for centuries more, yet never again as the center of world power. Its glory days were finished. Its imperial dreams ended. The city that had once ruled nations would learn to serve new masters, accepting the changes that time and providence brought. Cyrus, the gentle conqueror. In the year 5539 before Christ, as autumn winds whispered across the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, a different kind of conqueror approached Babylon's mighty fortifications. His name was Cyrus of Persia, and history would remember him not for the cities he burned or the peoples he enslaved, but for something far more unusual. He came as a liberator. The great gates of Babylon stood open. No siege engines thundered against the fortifications. No battering rams pounded the bronze-plated doors. Instead, Cyrus walked through the streets like a welcomed guest, his Persian robes flowing in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of date palms and river water. Babylon had fallen without a single arrow fired in anger. The city's priests had grown weary of their mad king Nabonidus, who spent his days worshipping the moon deity Sin while neglecting Marduk, the patron deity of their beloved city. When Cyrus promised to honor their gods and restore their temples, the gates swung wide. The Persian king understood something that countless conquerors before him had missed. True power came not from crushing the spirit of a people, but from embracing their dreams. He walked through Babylon's markets, greeting merchants in their own tongue. He bowed before the statue of Marduk in the great temple, offering prayers as if he had been born beside the Euphrates. In the royal palace, where Nebuchadnezzar once interpreted dreams and Belshazzar saw ghostly writing on surfaces, Cyrus sat upon the throne with quiet dignity. He wore no crown of gold, demanded no tribute of silver. Instead, he called for his scribes and dictated words that would echo through centuries. "I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, mighty king," the cylinder proclaimed in cuneiform script. Yet then came the revolutionary part. "When I entered Babylon peacefully, I took up my lordly residence in the royal palace amid joy and happiness. I returned the sacred images of the gods to their sanctuaries." The cylinder spoke of freedom for the displaced peoples. Exiles could return to their homelands. Temples could be rebuilt. Ancient customs could be restored. It was a decree unlike any the world had seen, carved in clay and baked hard as stone. Persian soldiers walked the streets of Babylon, not as occupiers but as protectors. They helped rebuild shrines that had fallen into disrepair. They escorted families of exiles to the city gates, providing them with supplies for their journeys home. The empire Cyrus built would stretch from India to Greece, yet it ruled through respect rather than fear. In the evenings, as the sun painted the Euphrates golden, Cyrus would walk along the river's edge. Local fishermen nodded respectfully as he passed. Children played in the dusty streets, unafraid of the foreign king who spoke gently and kept his promises. This was conquest, transformed into something beautiful. The hanging gardens still bloomed under Persian care. Water flowed through their terraces, as it had for centuries. The ziggurat of Marduk rose toward heaven, its steps worn smooth by countless pilgrims. Life in Babylon continued much as it always had, yet with a new sense of hope. Cyrus established a new kind of empire, one that celebrated diversity rather than demanding uniformity. Local governors ruled according to ancient customs. Priests performed rituals in languages their fathers had spoken for 1,000 years. The Persian king had discovered that an empire of willing subjects was far stronger than one built on resentment and rebellion. Years passed peacefully in Babylon under Persian rule. The city remained prosperous, its canals flowing with clear water, its markets bustling with goods from across the known world. Caravans arrived from distant lands, bringing spices from India, silk from the Far East, precious stones from the mountains of Afghanistan. When Cyrus died in battle far from Babylon, defending his empire's distant borders, the city mourned him as they would a beloved father. His successors continued his gentle policies, understanding that their grandfather's wisdom had created something precious and rare. The Persian Empire would endure for 2 centuries, and much of its strength came from this moment when a conqueror chose compassion over cruelty. Cyrus had shown the world that true greatness lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to preserve and protect what was beautiful in human civilization. In Babylon's quiet temples, priests still offered prayers of gratitude for the king who had restored their sacred traditions. The city slept peacefully under Persian stars, dreaming of the gentle conqueror who had chosen to build bridges rather than fortifications. The return to Zion. Dawn broke softly over Babylon as families gathered their precious belongings, preparing for a journey that would carry them away from the only home many had ever known. After 70 years in exile, the people of Judah were finally free to return to Jerusalem. The decree of Cyrus had opened doors that seemed forever sealed. Along the dusty roads leading west from Babylon, a slow procession began to form. Wagons creaked under the weight of household goods, sacred containers, and carefully wrapped scrolls containing the precious words of their faith. Children who had never seen the hills of Judea walked beside grandparents who remembered Solomon's temple in all its glory. The journey stretched nearly 1,000 miles across desert and mountain, river and plain. Each step carried them farther from the land where they had learned to sing the Lord's song in a strange place, closer to the homeland their hearts had never forgotten. The road dust settled on their robes like a benediction, marking their passage from captivity to freedom. Zerubbabel led the first group of returning exiles, his name meaning seed of Babylon. He carried with him the gold and silver containers that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple decades earlier. These sacred objects had been carefully preserved in Babylonian treasuries, waiting for this moment of restoration. The Persian king had been generous beyond their wildest dreams. Not only were they free to leave, yet they were given supplies for the journey and materials to rebuild their temple. Cyrus understood that a people restored to their ancestral home would become loyal subjects of his vast empire. As the caravan moved through the Syrian desert, older exiles shared stories of Jerusalem with younger generations. They described the temple's courtyards where priests had offered sacrifices, the streets where David had once walked, the hills where prophets had proclaimed God's word. These memories, kept alive through decades of longing, would soon become reality. The road was long and often difficult. Summer heat beat down mercilessly during the day, while nights brought desert cold that chilled to the bone. Wells were few and precious. Sandstorms forced them to shelter behind their wagons, waiting for the wind to calm. Yet spirits remained high, sustained by the promise of home. Some families chose to remain in Babylon. They had built lives along the rivers of Mesopotamia, established businesses, raised children who spoke Aramaic as easily as Hebrew. The exile had lasted 3 generations. For many, Babylon had become home in ways that Jerusalem could never be again. Yet thousands answered the call to return. They came from all walks of life, priests and Levites ready to restore temple worship, craftsmen eager to rebuild the city's fortifications, farmers who dreamed of planting vineyards in the hills of Judah, teachers who carried the law in their hearts and scrolls in their packs. The caravans stretched for miles, a river of people flowing westward toward their ancestral home. Persian soldiers provided protection, ensuring safe passage through territories where bandits might otherwise have struck. This was Cyrus's gift to the returning exiles, a guarantee of safety on their journey to freedom. When they crested the final hill and saw Jerusalem spread before them, many wept. The city lay in ruins, its fortifications broken, its buildings crumbled. Weeds grew in the temple courtyards. Wild animals had made their homes in the rubble of once proud houses. Yet, this was still the city of David, the place where God had chosen to dwell among his people. The work of rebuilding began immediately. Families cleared debris from ancient foundations, searching for building stones that could be used again. The altar was rebuilt first, allowing sacrifices to be offered even before the temple itself was restored. The sound of hammers and chisels rang out across the city as Jerusalem slowly came back to life. Not everyone welcomed their return. Local peoples who had settled in the land during the exile viewed the newcomers with suspicion. Political tensions arose as returning exiles claimed ancestral properties. The work of rebuilding was complicated by opposition from those who preferred the status quo. Yet the community persevered under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, who arrived in later waves of return. Jerusalem's fortifications were rebuilt and its temple restored. The city that had once been the jewel of David's kingdom began to shine again, though it would never quite recapture the glory of Solomon's day. Many of the returning exiles carried with them something precious beyond gold or silver. They brought scrolls containing the writings of prophets who had sustained their faith during the dark years of exile. Isaiah's words of comfort, Jeremiah's promises of restoration, Ezekiel's visions of a new temple. These texts would form the heart of the Hebrew Bible, preserving for all time the story of exile and return. The Persian Empire made this return possible, yet it was faith that sustained the journey. The belief that God had not forgotten his people, that promises made in ancient times would be fulfilled. That home was not just a place, but a calling. The return to Zion became a pattern of hope that would echo through centuries whenever people found themselves far from home and longing for restoration. Babylon, after the empire. The great city settled into a gentler rhythm as the Persian Empire matured around it. No longer the capital of the world, Babylon became something perhaps more precious, a place where cultures met and mingled like tributaries flowing into a great river. The ancient fortifications still stood strong, yet they enclosed a different kind of kingdom. Now, Persian administrators governed from the palace where Nebuchadnezzar once dreamed his troubling dreams. They wore different robes and spoke a different language, yet they treated the city with respect. The temples remained active, their priests still performing rituals that stretched back to the dawn of civilization. Marduk's ziggurat continued to rise toward heaven, a stairway of brick and ancient prayers. Babylonian scholars found new purpose under Persian rule. The great library collections, written in cuneiform on countless clay tablets, became treasures sought by learned men from across the empire. Students came from distant provinces to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law in the schools that had flourished here for over 1,000 years. The Hanging Gardens, if they truly existed, probably reached their most magnificent form during these peaceful years. Persian gardeners, masters of irrigation and landscape design, would have understood and appreciated such an ambitious project. Water flowed through carefully designed channels, nourishing exotic plants from across the known world. Trade flourished as never before. The Persian royal road connected Babylon to Persepolis and beyond, carrying merchants and their goods in both directions. Silk from distant China passed through Babylonian markets. Spices from India perfumed the air around the trading posts. Gold from Lydia jingled in the purses of wealthy citizens. The city's reputation for learning attracted scholars from Greece, Egypt, and other centers of civilization. They came to study the astronomical observations that Babylonian priests had been recording for centuries. The movements of planets, the cycles of eclipses, the intricate dance of celestial bodies, all carefully noted and preserved in the temple archives. Babylonian mathematics influenced thinkers throughout the Persian Empire. The base 60 number system, which gave us 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles, spread along the trade routes. Young mathematicians learned to solve complex problems using methods developed beside the Euphrates centuries earlier. The old tensions between conquered and conqueror gradually faded. Intermarriage became common. Persian nobles married into Babylonian families, while Babylonian merchants established themselves in Persepolis and other Persian cities. The empire's strength came from this blending of traditions and talents. Religious life adapted to the new reality. The gods of ancient Babylon kept receiving their offerings and prayers, yet they now coexisted in the city alongside Persian divinities and the faiths of other conquered peoples. This approach to religious tolerance, groundbreaking for that era, fostered a peaceful harmony that remarkably few empires ever managed to accomplish. Those who came after Cyrus upheld his approach of honoring local traditions and customs. Darius the Great made multiple visits to Babylon, taking part in their religious celebrations and meeting with regional administrators. The city flourished in prosperity and contentment, becoming a precious gem in Persia's imperial crown instead of merely another conquered territory. The renowned Ishtar Gate, adorned with its striking blue tiles and animals rendered in gold, greeted travelers arriving from every corner of the known world. Those who journeyed there recorded their wonder at the city's magnificence and prosperity. Babylon had evolved into a representation of what humanity could accomplish when diverse peoples collaborated in peaceful harmony. With the passing of decades, the recollections of independence slowly dimmed. The younger Babylonian generations came of age as citizens of Persia, taking positions within the imperial government and armed forces. A number of them ascended to influential positions, providing counsel to monarchs and overseeing provinces. The administrative expertise the city had cultivated through its centuries as an empire discovered fresh purpose in serving Persia. The major festivals carried on largely as they had throughout the ages. The New Year festivities, during which Marduk's statue was paraded through the streets in dignified ceremony, attracted multitudes from throughout the empire. The monarch himself would occasionally take part, paying respect to the time-honored customs that had elevated Babylon to greatness. The evening hours brought a distinctive enchantment to the city. Lamps glimmered in windows across the residential neighborhoods. Sounds of joy and discussion floated from rooftop gardens. Young ones played in courtyards as their parents talked about the day's affairs. The river mirrored the city's illumination, forming a reflected Babylon in the dark waters below. Persian-era Babylon stood as possibly the most internationally diverse city the world had witnessed to that point. A multitude of languages filled its marketplaces. Dining establishments offered cuisine from every region of the empire. Sacred spaces honored deities from faraway territories. This was a location where distinctions were embraced rather than dreaded. This prosperous era of cultural blending would endure for 200 years, establishing a paradigm of acceptance and collaboration that subsequent empires would find challenging to replicate. Babylon had discovered a different form of magnificence, not as a military conqueror, but as a connection point between different worlds. Alexander's Dying moments. The youthful monarch who had conquered the world entered Babylon on a spring afternoon in 323 before the Common Era. His physical form already weakening, though his determination remained as fierce as always. Alexander of Macedon had led his forces from the Greek highlands to the coasts of India, securing triumph after triumph. Now, however, he came seeking respite in the ancient metropolis that had witnessed countless empires emerge and crumble. Babylon received him as it had received conquerors throughout history. The massive gates opened wide. The religious leaders offered their blessings. The populace gathered along the roadways to glimpse this golden-haired young man who had brought the formidable Persian Empire to its knees. Yet Alexander arrived not as one who destroys, but as one who envisions, making preparations to establish Babylon as the capital of his new global empire. The royal residence that had sheltered Nebuchadnezzar and Persian monarchs now resonated with Greek conversation. Alexander's loyal followers, warriors who had accompanied him across half the known world, wandered the ancient hallways in amazement. They gazed in wonder at the hanging gardens, examined the astronomical charts and the temples, traversed the walls that had defended the city for more than a millennium. Ambitions multiplied in Alexander's active imagination like blossoms following rainfall. He intended to reconstruct the massive ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, rendering it even more spectacular than its previous form. Fresh harbors would be excavated to house vessels from his expanding naval fleet. Highways would link Babylon to every region of his immense empire. The city would transform into the center of a wheel, extending across the entire known world. However, the young ruler's physical form, strained beyond its limits by years of unceasing military campaigns, started to undermine his magnificent aspirations. Illness struck him down within the palace chambers where ancient rulers had previously presided. The medical practitioners were powerless to help. The warrior who had vanquished entire armies found himself unable to vanquish the unseen adversary that raged within his bloodstream. While Alexander lay expiring in the royal quarters, his military commanders assembled around his bedside like scavenging birds. They were already parceling out his empire amongst themselves, each staking a claim to a portion of the world he had seized. The cohesion he had enforced through sheer force of character would disintegrate the instant he took his final breath. The city waited anxiously as reports of the monarch's condition circulated through the streets. Babylonians had witnessed numerous rulers arrive and depart, yet this particular one was distinct. He had given his word to elevate their city to become the world's greatest. He had wed a Persian noblewoman in an elaborate ceremony held there, creating a symbolic union between Eastern and Western cultures. His passing would leave those aspirations unrealized. Alexander's dying utterance, as legend tells it, came when he was questioned about who ought to receive his empire. "To the strongest," he murmured. Although some maintained he spoke the name Craterus, one of his most reliable generals. This vagueness would trigger decades of conflict as those who succeeded him battled over the prizes of his military victories. The great military leader expired on the 10th of June in his 33rd year of life. His remains were laid in a golden burial container, though his commanders would subsequently fight over even this final resting place. The realm he had constructed through 13 years of continuous warfare started to splinter before his funeral ceremonies concluded. Babylon observed the peculiar sight of mature warriors shedding tears over the passing of a foreign monarch. Alexander's troops, who had accompanied him devotedly across wastelands and mountain ranges, grieved like youngsters who had lost their father figure. Absent his magnetic leadership, they were merely hired soldiers distant from their homeland. The city's religious leaders conducted the ancient ceremonies for a deceased ruler. Although Alexander had governed Babylon for fewer than 2 years, they perceived something in him that went beyond nationality or heritage. He had possessed the characteristic that the Babylonians termed melamu, the celestial radiance that distinguished a genuine king. In the days after Alexander's passing, his military leaders divided his empire like traders separating merchandise at a bazaar. Babylon went to Seleucus, among his most skilled commanders, who would found a ruling dynasty that governed Mesopotamia for more than 2 centuries. The city's destiny was determined by ambitious warriors who regarded it as a treasure to be seized rather than a community to be valued. Nevertheless, elements of Alexander's vision persisted in Babylon. The merging of Greek and Persian traditions that he had encouraged continued under those who followed. Babylonian star watchers studied Greek mathematical principles. Greek stone carvers absorbed Mesopotamian methods. The city transformed into a cultural intersection where Eastern and Western traditions met in manners that enhanced both cultures. The royal residence where Alexander died became a pilgrimage destination for his admirers. They arrived to show their reverence and to recall the individual who had envisioned bringing the world together under a single authority. His passing signified the conclusion of one historical period and the start of another, as the Hellenistic realms that arose from his empire initiated their own historical chapters. Babylon had borne witness to the deaths of numerous great monarchs, yet none quite comparable to Alexander. He had come as a military conqueror, yet died as an idealist. His ambitious plans remained incomplete, but his concept of cultural unification was destined to shape the world for centuries ahead. The ancient metropolis, which had observed the emergence and decline of so many empires, quietly readied itself to outlast yet another ruling dynasty. As nightfall descended over the Euphrates on the day Alexander died, the river maintained its perpetual journey toward the ocean. Babylon had withstood Assyrians and Persians, and it would withstand Greeks as well. The city's genuine power had never resided in its military forces, but in its capacity to adjust, to persist, to convert conquerors into residents. Alexander's death marked not a conclusion, but another chapter in the extended chronicle of this extraordinary location. The structure that reached for the heavens. In the mist of dawn during ancient times, when the world remained youthful and humanity's hearts blazed with seemingly impossible dreams, there existed a tower that stretched toward the celestial realm. Those who constructed it named it Etemenanki, which translated to House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. However, the world would come to know it by a different designation, the Tower of Babel. The narrative commences with a population who communicated in a single tongue and pursued a common aspiration. They had wandered throughout the earth following the catastrophic flood, searching for a location to establish as their homeland. Upon reaching the plain of Shinar adjacent to the flowing Euphrates waters, they chose to settle. The earth was fertile, the water was pure, and the level terrain extended without limit toward all directions. "Come," they declared to each other. "Let us fashion bricks and construct ourselves a city." They had mastered the technique of molding clay into rectangular blocks, hardening them through intense heat in enormous kilns. These bricks would prove more durable than any stone, more consistent than any timber. With such building materials, they believed their imaginations held no boundaries. Yet a city alone proved insufficient for hearts overflowing with such grand visions. "Let us construct a tower," they proclaimed, "one whose summit may extend unto heaven." They envisioned a construction so elevated that its peak would contact the dwelling of the divine. Through this tower, they would establish a reputation for themselves and guarantee they would never again be dispersed across the earth. Labor commenced at daybreak each morning as the sun colored the eastern horizon gold. Thousands upon thousands of workers transported bricks up the ascending ramps, each brick positioned with attention and exactness. The tower expanded gradually, yet consistently, projecting an increasingly longer shadow over the surrounding metropolis. Young ones frolicked in that shadow, their sounds reverberating up the enormous walls. The construction workers organized themselves into teams, each accountable for a portion of the building effort. Expert artisans supervised the labor, examining blueprints etched on clay tablets. Technical specialists computed the stress and mass, confirming the base could sustain the enormous load. The undertaking consumed the resources of an entire society. As the tower climbed higher, the laborers started to transform. Arrogance seeped into their hearts like contamination in a water source. They started to think that nothing remained beyond their capabilities, that they could defy heaven itself. The tower evolved beyond merely a tribute to human accomplishment, transforming into a representation of human presumption. Years elapsed, and the tower achieved heights no structure had previously attained. From its elevated platforms, laborers could observe farther than any human had observed previously. Waterways appeared like silver strands. Urban centers resembled youngsters' playthings. The curvature of the earth itself became apparent on cloudless days. However, as the tower ascended toward the heavens, the solidarity of its constructors started to fracture. Disagreements emerged regarding techniques and components. Various groups created their individual methods of discussing the labor. What had started as one language gradually separated into regional variations, then into completely distinct tongues. The disarray intensified with each succeeding day. Laborers could no longer comprehend their overseers. Technical specialists could not communicate their blueprints to the workers. The meticulous coordination that had rendered the tower achievable dissolved into disorder and incomprehension. The massive undertaking ground to a standstill. God gazed down upon the tower and the population who constructed it. He observed their arrogance, their ambition to elevate themselves to equal the divine. "Behold," he declared, "the people are united, and they all possess one language. Nothing will remain impossible for them." The solidarity that might have accomplished tremendous good was becoming corrupted by boundless ambition. Therefore the Lord dispersed the languages of the earth, creating confusion in the speech of the constructors. Where previously there had existed one people with one objective, now there existed numerous tribes communicating in numerous languages. They could no longer collaborate on their magnificent project. The tower remained incomplete, a tribute to both human aspiration and human constraint. The population deserted their massive tower and dispersed throughout the earth, carrying their new languages with them. Some journeyed north into the mountainous regions, others south toward the ocean. They established new urban centers and created new nations, but they never again tried to construct a tower reaching to heaven. The deserted tower remained for centuries, gradually deteriorating as wind and precipitation eroded its meticulously placed bricks. Local inhabitants named it Babel, signifying confusion, recalling the day when language itself transformed into an obstacle between human souls. Birds created nests in its openings, and climbing plants grew along its walls. Nevertheless, the tower's narrative persisted, transmitted through generations in the languages that had originated from its confusion. Every civilization that encountered the tale grasped its significance. Human accomplishment holds value, yet human arrogance proves dangerous. The ambition to reach heaven possesses nobility, but only when it springs from modesty rather than presumption. In Babylon, where the ancient tower was believed to have existed, people constructed new ziggurats that similarly reached toward heaven. However, these served as temples, not tributes to human arrogance. They functioned as pathways for the deities to descend to earth, not ladders for mortals to ascend to heaven. The teaching of Babel had been absorbed. The narrative of the Tower of Babel transformed into one of humanity's profound cautionary accounts. It served to remind people that unity represents a precious gift to be treasured, that communication constitutes a blessing to be safeguarded, and that the most elevated human accomplishments emerge not from arrogance, but from collaboration directed by wisdom. Even in present times, when travelers observe the remnants of ancient ziggurats emerging from the desert terrain, they recall the narrative of the tower that reached for the heavens. It exists as a reminder that human aspirations appear most magnificent when they recognize the divine enigma that exists beyond our grasp. Reverberations in Revelation. In the concluding book of the Christian Bible, composed on the rocky island of Patmos by an exiled individual named John, Babylon reappears as a vision shrouded in enigma and terror. However, this is not the historical metropolis of Nebuchadnezzar or Cyrus. This is Babylon metamorphosed into symbolism, a spiritual realm that encompasses the world yet harbors the elements of its own annihilation. The Apostle John, exiled to his island confinement for proclaiming teachings about Jesus, received visions that transported him beyond the limits of time and space. Within these revelations, he observed a woman adorned in purple and scarlet, seated upon a scarlet beast, possessing 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon her forehead appeared an inscription, "Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." This Babylon was not constructed of brick and construction material, but of human arrogance and spiritual defiance. She was intoxicated with the wine of her fornication, corrupting the monarchs of the earth with her enticing power. Traders became wealthy through her extreme luxuries, while the impoverished suffered beneath her shadow. She embodied everything that the ancient metropolis had previously represented to its adversaries: prosperity constructed on subjugation, magnificence concealing internal decay. John observed in his vision as this symbolic Babylon grasped a golden chalice brimming with abominations. The chalice sparkled in the illumination, attracting all who glimpsed it. However, its contents proved poisonous to the spirit. This represented the intoxication of worldly authority, the deceptive promise that material prosperity could fulfill spiritual yearning. The beast that bore Babylon was adorned with blasphemous titles representing the political and economic mechanisms that facilitate such corruption. Its 7 heads symbolized the hills of Rome, clarifying that John was addressing the imperial structure of his contemporary era. Nevertheless, the vision extended beyond any individual empire to encompass all manifestations of worldly authority that position themselves in opposition to God. An angel disclosed to John the significance of his vision. "The waters which you observed where the harlot sits represent peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues," the angel clarified. Babylon's authority originated not from military strength alone, but from her capacity to entice entire populations into worshipping prosperity, ease, and earthly achievement rather than pursuing spiritual truth. However, this symbolic Babylon carried within herself the guarantee of her own downfall. "The beast that transports her will despise her," the angel foretold. "They will render her desolate and exposed, will consume her flesh, and incinerate her with flames." The very forces that facilitated her corruption would ultimately turn against her, devouring what they had previously sustained. John observed a powerful angel seize a stone resembling a massive millstone and hurl it into the ocean, proclaiming, "Thus with force shall that great city Babylon be cast down, and shall be discovered no more at all." The vision communicated sudden, complete annihilation, not gradual deterioration, but catastrophic collapse. The mourning that followed represented one of the most haunting passages in all Scripture. "Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that powerful city, wailed the monarchs of the earth as they observed her burning, for in 1 hour has thy judgment arrived." The traders wept as they witnessed their source of prosperity vanish in smoke and flame. Even the mariners and ship commanders mourned, crying out when they observed the smoke of her burning. "What city resembles this great city?" They scattered dust upon their heads and lamented, for their survival had depended on her prosperity. In 1 hour, such tremendous riches had come to nothing. However, not everyone mourned Babylon's collapse. A voice from the heavens proclaimed, "Rejoice over her, you heavens, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you upon her." Those who had endured under her tyranny celebrated her destruction as divine justice ultimately realized. The vision then transformed to reveal what would succeed fallen Babylon. John observed a new Jerusalem, descending from heaven, resembling a bride prepared for her husband. This city required no temple, for God himself would reside there. No sun or moon would illuminate it, for the glory of the Lamb would provide its light. The distinction could not have been more evident. Where Babylon represented human arrogance and defiance, the New Jerusalem embodied divine grace and restoration. Where Babylon corrupted through her prosperity and authority, the New Jerusalem healed through the river of life flowing from God's throne. This prophetic utilization of Babylon's designation ensured that the ancient metropolis would exist forever in human remembrance, not merely as a historical location, but as a spiritual concept. Throughout Christian history, believers would apply the designation Babylon to any mechanism that seemed to embody worldly arrogance and resistance to God's kingdom. The Babylon of Revelation was simultaneously specific and universal. It addressed John's contemporaries regarding the Roman Empire that oppressed them, yet it also addressed future generations regarding every manifestation of spiritual corruption that would emerge. The designation became a perspective through which believers could comprehend the ongoing conflict between the kingdom of God and the kingdoms of this world. In tranquil moments, as the Mediterranean waves lapped against the coastlines of Patmos, John must have contemplated the visions he had received. The historical Babylon had collapsed centuries prior, yet its spiritual legacy persisted in new manifestations. His apocalyptic composition ensured that the city's designation would continue to reverberate through time, a perpetual warning regarding the enticing danger of authority without modesty, prosperity without justice, and human accomplishment without divine blessing. Archaeologists amid the dust. In the tranquil heat of an Iraqi dawn, dust swirls around cautious hands, grasping delicate brushes. The year stands at 1899, and a German expedition led by Robert Kuldewy commences uncovering what had been resting beneath centuries of sand. They remain unaware yet, but they're on the verge of awakening Babylon from its extended slumber. The tells, those gentle elevations that dot the terrain, conceal more than earth and stone. Each stratum preserves whispers of distinct eras. Koldewey's expedition labors slowly, systematically, as archaeologists must. They comprehend that haste would obliterate the very narratives they've arrived to discover. The initial discoveries surface, like dreams materializing into reality. Fragments of glazed brick, brilliant blue, even following 2,500 years. The excavators pause, sweep away additional sand, and perceive the outline of something magnificent. It's a wall, yet not merely any wall. The colors shine through the dirt like precious gems awaiting cleaning. Month following month, season following season, the configuration of ancient Babylon discloses itself. The celebrated Ishtar Gate surfaces from its earthen resting place. Each blue brick, decorated with golden animals that appear to march eternally along the walls. Lions, bulls, and dragons proceed in perfect formations, their eyes still radiant with ancient intensity. However, archaeology advances at the pace of patience. Each fragment must be documented, each stratum mapped and photographed. The German expedition produces detailed illustrations, takes meticulous measurements, records every discovery in precise handwriting. They recognize they're grasping fragments of narratives that monarchs and prophets once experienced. The ziggurat foundations materialize next, enormous and square, ascending from the desert ground like the foundation of some forgotten mountain. Laborers remove tons of accumulated sand and rubble. What they discover astonishes them. The tower that may have inspired the account of Babel, its bricks still fitted together with ancient exactness. Cuneiform tablets surface by the thousands. Most represent business documents, inventories of grain and livestock, payments and obligations, yet others contain poetry, prayers, and royal chronicles. Each tablet represents hours of meticulous labor by long-deceased scribes, their wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay when the world remained young. The excavation discloses Babylon's double walls, those powerful fortifications that once rendered the city seemingly impregnable. Archaeologists measure their thickness, trace their route around the ancient city boundaries. They discover gates buried beneath debris, streets paved with baked brick, foundations of dwellings where families once assembled in the evening illumination. French archaeologist André Parrot continues the labor decades afterward, uncovering Mari, one of Babylon's competitor cities. His discoveries complete more fragments of the puzzle: palace walls adorned in fresco, diplomatic correspondence between ancient rulers, treasure chambers that contained golden cups and silver ornaments. The 20th century introduces new challenges. Conflicts interrupt the meticulous labor, political tensions render excavation difficult. However, the archaeologists return when circumstances permit, drawn by the promise of additional discoveries waiting beneath the sand. Contemporary techniques transform the labor. Ground-penetrating radar discloses buried structures without disturbing the earth above them. Computer mapping generates detailed plans of the ancient metropolis. Carbon dating supplies precise ages for organic materials discovered in the ruins. The artifacts journey to museums throughout the world. The Pergamon Museum in Berlin exhibits a reconstructed Ishtar Gate, its blue walls ascending in a climate-controlled chamber. Visitors traverse the same gateway that once greeted Babylonian monarchs and foreign ambassadors. Each discovery adds another voice to Babylon's chorus. A child's plaything discovered in a dwelling cellar, a woman's jewelry buried in a courtyard, a soldier's spear point embedded in a city wall. These small discoveries often narrate larger stories than the grand monuments. The labor continues presently, though more cautiously than previously. Modern archaeologists comprehend that excavation destroys, even as it discloses. They leave portions of sites undisturbed, understanding that future techniques might extract information that current methods would overlook. Digital archaeology now preserves discoveries in manners Coldaway could never have envisioned. Three-dimensional scans capture every detail of artifacts. Virtual reality reconstructions permit people to traverse through Babylon as it might have appeared in Nebuchadnezzar's time. The dust still swirls on tranquil mornings around the ruins. New discoveries await beneath layers of earth and time. Each season brings possibilities. Another tablet, another wall, another fragment of the vast puzzle that was ancient Babylon. The archaeologists labor onward, patient as the desert itself, understanding that every cautious brushstroke brings us closer to comprehending the people who once named this place home. Their implements are simple: brushes, trowels, screens for sifting sand. However, their mission connects us across the centuries to voices that refuse to be forgotten. In museums and universities, scholars continue translating the tablets, deciphering royal inscriptions, assembling the daily lives of ancient Babylonians. Each translation discloses new details regarding how they lived, what they believed, what they feared and hoped for. The labor of archaeology is slow, methodical, reverent. It requires the patience of a gardener and the precision of a surgeon. However, the rewards prove immeasurable. The recovery of lost worlds, the resurrection of forgotten voices, the bridge between then and now that helps us comprehend who we are and where we originated. Saddam's New Babylon. In the 1980s, beneath the scorching sun of modern Iraq, an unusual construction project commences near the ancient ruins. Workers arrive with modern equipment, yet their task appears extracted from history itself. They're reconstructing Babylon brick by brick on the orders of a dictator who perceives himself as the successor to Nebuchadnezzar. Saddam Hussein harbors grand visions dancing in his mind. He envisions himself as the new monarch of Babylon, restoring the glory of ancient Mesopotamia under his governance. The project transforms into his fixation, a monument to his own perceived magnificence, constructed on top of actual monuments from antiquity. The reconstruction commences with the palace complex. New walls ascend alongside ancient foundations. However, these walls tell a distinct narrative. Every few courses of traditional brick, workers insert modern bricks stamped with Saddam's designation and the date. It's as if the dictator desires to ensure that future archaeologists will know precisely who reconstructed this location. The new palace gleams with marble flooring and air conditioning, a peculiar mixture of ancient ambition and modern convenience. Saddam conducts meetings here, receives foreign dignitaries in chambers overlooking the ruins of the genuine Babylon. The contrast proves jarring. Power suits and briefcases in halls where cuneiform tablets once recorded the affairs of monarchs. Local laborers find the project simultaneously fascinating and troubling. They're constructing on top of genuine archaeological sites, covering actual ancient remains with modern concrete and plaster. Professional archaeologists observe in dismay as bulldozers advance through areas that haven't been properly excavated, destroying evidence that required millennia to accumulate. The reconstruction follows no historical precision. Walls materialize where no walls existed in ancient times. Buildings ascend in architectural styles that never graced the original metropolis. It's Babylon filtered through one individual's fantasy of what a great ruler's capital ought to resemble. Gardens are planted where Saddam believes the hanging gardens might have existed. Palm trees and flowering bushes create shade and magnificence, yet they're arranged according to modern landscaping principles rather than any ancient design. Fountains splash and gurgle, fed by electric pumps rather than the ingenious hydraulic systems the Babylonians might have utilized. The ziggurat receives special attention. Laborers construct a new structure over the ancient foundations, creating a stepped pyramid that ascends dramatically from the desert floor. It appears impressive from a distance. Yet up close, the modern materials and construction techniques prove obvious. The bricks are excessively uniform, the mortar excessively perfect, the angles excessively precise for something genuinely ancient. Saddam commissions murals for the interior walls. These depict scenes from Babylonian history, yet they're painted in a socialist, realist style, more appropriate to Soviet propaganda than ancient art. Nebuchadnezzar appears suspiciously similar to Saddam himself in some of the paintings, a not-so-subtle suggestion regarding who the genuine heir to Babylon's legacy might be. The Ishtar Gate receives reconstruction as well, though not at its original location. The new gate stands at the entrance to the palace complex, its blue bricks and golden animals gleaming in the desert sun. Yet the proportions prove incorrect, the colors excessively bright, the details simplified. It resembles a theme park version of the genuine article. International archaeological organizations protest the project. UNESCO expresses concern regarding damage to the actual ancient site. Scholars compose letters and articles explaining how the reconstruction harms our understanding of the real Babylon. However, construction continues regardless. The project employs hundreds of local laborers, providing employment in a region where work proves often scarce. Many of the craftsmen take pride in their skill, even if they question the project's wisdom. They learn traditional brickmaking techniques, practice ancient construction methods, develop expertise in working with clay and mortar. Saddam hosts festivals at his new Babylon, complete with performers in historical costumes and banquets served on replica ancient dinnerware. The events feel like historical reenactments crossed with political rallies. Guests praise the vision and ambition while privately wondering regarding the strange mixture of archaeology and propaganda. The palace transforms into a working government facility. Ministers conduct meetings in chambers decorated with reproductions of ancient Babylonian art. Bureaucrats shuffle papers in offices overlooking reconstructed ziggurats. It's a surreal blend of ancient grandeur and modern bureaucracy. Tourism to the site increases, though visitors often struggle to distinguish between the genuine ancient remains and Saddam's additions. Tour guides develop careful explanations regarding which walls are 2,500 years old and which were constructed during the reign of Iraq's modern monarch. The Iran-Iraq War interrupts construction at times, yet work resumes when conditions allow. The project transforms into a matter of national pride for some Iraqis, a symbol of their connection to the glorious civilizations that once flourished in their homeland. Archaeological damage from the reconstruction proves extensive. Ancient walls are covered with modern additions. Original foundations disappear beneath new structures. Context that required centuries to create becomes destroyed in months of construction activity. The reconstruction remains incomplete when Saddam's regime concludes in 2003. Construction equipment sits abandoned in the desert. Half-completed walls stand like broken teeth against the sky. The dream of a new Babylon fades as rapidly as it commenced. What remains represents a peculiar monument to ambition and ego, a location where genuine ancient history mixes uneasily with modern political theatre. The site continues to draw visitors, yet now they arrive to observe both the real Babylon and the peculiar legacy of a dictator who attempted to make himself its inheritor. The city slumbers once more. Presently, if you visit Babylon, you'll discover a location where silence has returned. The tour buses that once transported visitors to Saddam's reconstruction arrive less frequently now. The guards who once watched over the palace complex have moved onward to other responsibilities. The ancient metropolis settles back into the tranquil rhythms of the desert. Goats wander through courtyards where monarchs once conducted council. Their hoofbeats echo softly on stones that witnessed the ascent and descent of empires. A shepherd guides his small flock past walls constructed by Nebuchadnezzar, past gates where Daniel might have walked, past foundations that supported the aspirations of the powerful. The Euphrates still flows nearby, though its course has shifted over the centuries. The river that gave birth to civilization continues its patient journey toward the ocean, carrying silt and narratives in equal measure. Date palms line its banks, their fronds rustling in the warm breeze like whispered conversations between past and present. Local families sometimes picnic among the ruins on Friday afternoons. Children play hide-and-seek behind ancient walls, while their parents spread blankets on ground that once echoed with the footsteps of prophets and poets. Their laughter mingles with the desert wind, adding new voices to a location that has heard so many voices across the ages. The reconstructed portions of Saddam's Babylon are displaying their age. Paint peels from walls that were intended to last forever. Cracks materialize in concrete that seemed so solid when first poured. Nature commences the slow process of reclaiming what humans attempted to rebuild, just as it reclaimed the original metropolis centuries ago. Archaeological labor continues, yet at a cautious pace. International expeditions return when security conditions allow. Armed with new technologies and old patience, they work to separate the genuine ancient remains from the modern additions, attempting to comprehend what Babylon was genuinely like before politics and ego complicated the picture. The site museum, housed in one of Saddam's palace buildings, displays artifacts discovered during decades of excavation. Clay tablets, covered with cuneiform writing, sit in climate-controlled cases, their wedge-shaped marks still sharp following millennia. Jewelry, weapons, and household items narrate stories of daily life in the world's first great metropolis. Village women sometimes arrive to collect herbs that grow wild among the ruins. They know which plants prove good for cooking, which ones help with headaches, which ones their grandmothers utilized for dyeing wool. Their knowledge connects them to generations of women who gathered plants in this same soil when Babylon was alive and bustling. The tourist infrastructure that once supported thousands of visitors has largely disappeared. Hotels stand empty, their chambers filled only with dust and memories of busier times. Restaurant owners in nearby towns speak wistfully of the days when archaeologists and visitors provided steady business. Security concerns keep many international visitors away, though local Iraqi families continue to visit. They bring their children to observe where their ancestors constructed one of humanity's first great civilizations. The pride in their eyes mixes with sadness at seeing such an important location so tranquil and neglected. Bedouin occasionally camp near the ruins during their seasonal migrations. They pitch their black tents in the desert around Babylon, their camels grazing on scrub brush that grows between ancient foundations. At night, their cooking fires cast, dancing shadows on walls constructed when the world remained young. The celebrated Ishtar Gate, both the reconstructed version and the original ruins, stands patient in the desert illumination. The blue glazed bricks still catch the sun, their color as vibrant as always. Lions and dragons march eternally along the walls, frozen in glazed clay, witnesses to the passing of empires and the endurance of art. Sunrise and sunset bring special magnificence to the ruins. The low-angled illumination picks out details invisible during the harsh glare of midday. Shadows define the shapes of walls and courtyards, giving temporary form to spaces that once bustled with life. The desert discloses its subtle colors, dozens of shades of brown and gold and red. Rain, when it arrives, transforms the site completely. The usually dusty ground darkens and releases the sweet aroma of wet earth. Puddles form in courtyards and reflect the sky, creating temporary mirrors that double the height of ancient walls. Steam ascends from sun-warmed stones, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Birds nest in crevices between ancient bricks. Their songs add life to the tranquil ruins, a reminder that nature continues its cycles regardless of human ambitions. Lizards sun themselves on walls constructed by Hammurabi's architects. Their quick movements constitute the only motion in otherwise still courtyards. The night sky above Babylon remains spectacular, unpolluted by city illumination. The same stars that guided Babylonian astronomers still wheel overhead. The constellations they designated and mapped continue their ancient dance, indifferent to the ascent and descent of the civilizations that first learned to read their movements. Local guards make their rounds quietly, more protectors than enforcers. They know every stone, every wall, every corner of the site. Some have labored here for decades, watching seasons change and visitors arrive and depart. Their presence ensures that Babylon remains safe, even in its slumber. The silence of modern Babylon proves profound, yet not empty. It's filled with possibility, with the weight of history, with the patient endurance of stones that have witnessed more human drama than any other location on earth. The metropolis slumbers, yet like all sleepers, it dreams. Babylon in our dreams. As darkness settles over the ancient ruins and modern cities alike, Babylon persists in locations that exist beyond geography and time. It breathes in the pages of holy books, stirs in the hearts of poets, and whispers through the collective memory of humanity. The physical metropolis may slumber beneath Iraqi sand, yet its soul wanders freely through our dreams and narratives. In synagogues throughout the world, voices still chant the words composed by exiles who sat by Babylon's rivers. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat and wept. The psalm echoes in Jerusalem and New York, in Buenos Aires and Mumbai, wherever people gather to remember how sorrow can transform into hope. The Hebrew words carry the weight of ancient tears and the lightness of eventual redemption. Churches preserve their own Babylonian memories. In stained glass windows, Daniel stands calm among the lions, while colored illumination streams across the faces of worshippers. Children learn the narrative of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, finding courage in the account of 3 young men who refused to bow down. The fiery furnace transforms into a symbol of faith tested and found pure. Artists across centuries have painted their visions of Babylon. Peter Bruegel's Tower of Babel spirals impossibly toward heaven, its architecture a mixture of Roman grandeur and Gothic fantasy. John Martin's dramatic canvases display the metropolis in apocalyptic splendor, with lightning splitting dark skies above ziggurats that gleam like jewels. Each artist adds their own dreams to Babylon's endless narrative. Musicians hear Babylon's rhythms in their compositions. Verdi's Hebrew slaves sing of their homeland while laboring in Babylonian fields, their chorus among opera's most moving laments. Bob Marley transforms the biblical imagery into reggae poetry, singing of Babylon as a symbol of oppression that must someday collapse. The city's designation carries different meanings for different voices, yet it never loses its power to inspire. Writers discover in Babylon a perfect metaphor for human ambition and its consequences. Science fiction authors envision future Babylons among the stars, great cities that ascend and descend on distant worlds. Fantasy novelists create magical kingdoms that echo the ancient city's grandeur and hubris. The patterns repeat because the narrative of Babylon touches something profound in human nature. In the digital age, Babylon discovers new life in video games and virtual worlds. Players construct their own versions of the ancient metropolis, complete with hanging gardens and towering ziggurats. They assume the roles of Hammurabi or Nebuchadnezzar, making decisions that shape the destiny of virtual civilizations. The city transforms into interactive, responsive to choices made by people sitting at computers thousands of miles and years away from the original. Children still hear Babylonian narratives at bedtime. Parents read picture books regarding the brave prophet in the lion's den, regarding the proud monarch who became humble, regarding the tower that attempted to reach excessively high. The narratives teach lessons regarding courage, humility, and the dangers of arrogance. They plant seeds that may bloom into deeper understanding years afterward. Scholars continue to study Babylon, not merely as an ancient metropolis, but as an idea that has shaped human thinking. They trace its influence through literature and law, through art and architecture, through the development of urban civilization itself. Academic conferences bring together experts who debate Babylonian influence on everything from modern city planning to contemporary legal systems. The metropolis materializes in dreams, both sleeping and waking. Archaeologists dream of perfect excavations that disclose all of Babylon's secrets. Believers dream of walking with Daniel through palace corridors. Artists dream of observing the hanging gardens in full bloom, their terraces cascading with flowers and running water. Each dreamer adds their vision to the city's endless resurrection. Modern Baghdad, constructed near ancient Babylon's ruins, carries forward something of the old city's spirit. Its markets buzz with the energy of commerce that once filled Babylonian streets. Its scholars continue the tradition of learning that rendered ancient Babylon a center of knowledge. The river that flows through both cities connects past and present with liquid threads. Babylon persists in the patterns we repeat without realizing. Every time we construct a metropolis, we echo Babylon. Every time we create laws, we follow paths first traced by Hammurabi. Every time we reach for the stars, literally or figuratively, we repeat the gesture of the tower builders. The city's essence runs through human civilization. In tranquil moments, when the day's noise fades and night settles around us, Babylon whispers from the spaces between memory and imagination. It reminds us that all earthly cities are temporary, that all human achievements will someday slumber beneath the sand of time. However, it also suggests that something endures beyond the physical. The narratives we tell, the dreams we share, the hope that even broken things can be rendered magnificent again. The metropolis materializes differently to each person who encounters it. To some, it represents the dangers of unchecked authority. To others, it symbolizes the heights human creativity can reach. To many, it offers both warnings and inspiration, displaying how civilizations ascend through cooperation and descend through arrogance. Babylon continues to construct itself in human hearts, one narrative at a time, one dream at a time, one tranquil moment of reflection at a time. The ancient metropolis by the river has become eternal, not through the permanence of its stones, but through the persistence of human memory and imagination. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of walking through Babylon's gates, hearing the whisper of wind through ruined walls. observing stars wheel overhead, just as they did when the city remained young. In dreams, all cities prove possible, all narratives true, all conclusions open to hope. The ancient metropolis slumbers, yet it never ceases dreaming. And in its dreams, it observes all the Babylons yet to arrive, all the towers yet to ascend, all the gardens yet to bloom in the patient desert of human time.